the major components of inflation are moving in the right direction.
On the good news front, we are expecting rents to finally come down. I know this has been a bit like waiting for Godot, but we are expecting that to be a significant factor as we move into the second and third quarters of this year.
Home Depot says it's going to buy building products distributor SRS Distribution. The price tag there, $18.25 billion. And Walgreens Boots Alliance narrowing its fiscal 2024 guidance, citing a challenging retail environment. S&P 500, 2 points higher, 5250 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 19 points, and the Nasdaq Composite Index down 20 points. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues with Joe Matthew. Happy Friday Light.
Yes, Little Friday, as we like to call it here on Balance of Power. John Tucker, great to see you. Nice to spend another afternoon together. Tried to get news out of Ned Lamont for you on the congestion tax. I don't think it's going.
Strike out there.
Yeah, I tried. Great to have you with us. Welcome to Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and the satellite. As we consider news now from the former governor of New Jersey, thanks but no thanks. How's this for a statement? I appreciate the encouragement from Chris Christie. This is about a potential run on no labels. And I will tell you, we had it on pretty darn good sources that this might actually happen as recently as last week when we spoke with the now late Joe Lieberman. The statement goes on to write, I also believe that if there is not a pathway to win, and if my candidacy is in any way, shape, or form helping Donald Trump become president again, then it is not the way forward, unquote. I thought maybe Matt Bennett had written that for him. Of course, one of our frequent Democratic panelists here on the program, Matt Bennett at Third Way, is with us right now because Third Way has been working overtime to talk about this no labels effort. And I think I could dare say, Matt, snuff it out. Is this the end? We lost Joe Lieberman, and I want to be sensitive here. I'm trying to be delicate around this. But he was a driving force behind this group. And now the last great hope, it seems, of a candidate, and Chris Christie has said no. Are we done?
We don't know. It's a free country. If No Labels wants to go forward and they can find somebody to lead their ticket, they can. And at least so far, they are not saying anything about folding their tent. But to your point, they've suffered two serious blows. One, the tragic loss of Senator Lieberman, who we all mourn as a great leader for this country, was also their founding chairman and was a driving force behind the group. But he didn't run it day to day. It's being run by their founder and CEO, Nancy Jacobson, and really this is going to be up to her. But the bigger problem, as you point out, is that they cannot find an A-list candidate. They can't even find a B-list candidate. They were floating a former lieutenant governor as their potential presidential candidate a couple of weeks ago. So it's tough there.
The great Jeff Duncan campaign that wasn't. Okay, this, by the way, was initially reported by the Washington Post, the Christie story. If we can't get a candidate, that also means we probably can't get it on the ballot in most places, correct?
That's right. They had said that they would have ballot access by the end of last year in 34 states. They now have it in 18, so they're way behind predictions. And there's a bunch of states where they can't even begin to get on the ballot until they name a candidate because of state rules. So they're really up against it. In fact, in New York, they face a looming deadline in a couple of weeks where they must have a candidate and they must submit their signatures. And it does not appear that they're ready to do that. So there's some real questions about the logistics here. If they do pick a candidate, they are going to be handing that person an enormously difficult set of problems, not only to compete with a current president, a former president, and a Kennedy, but also to gain ballot access in most places.
Let's talk about a Kennedy, because I want to ask you about this running mate. I'm fascinated by this whole story, the Nicole Shanahan element. And I've read some commentary in the wild already that came from you, so I think I know where you are on this. But in terms of no labels, taking a look at RFK Jr., is that a possibility?
I don't think so. RFK Jr. does not fit any of the metrics that No Labels had set for itself around kind of a unity ticket. And I'm not sure RFK Jr. would be interested in the No Labels endorsement at this point. So I doubt it'll be them, the Kennedy Shanahan team. If No Labels goes forward, it'll be probably with somebody far less prominent than Kennedy.
What does our audience need to know about Nicole Shanahan? This choice is interesting to me, and folks like yourself have tried to make clear that this is about ballot access. Tell us why.
Without a doubt. I mean, Nicole Shanahan has three qualities. She is over the age of 35 and born in the United States, which means she is constitutionally able to become vice president. And she's rich. She's got a lot of money. She is the former wife of one of the Google founders. And that allows them great flexibility, because if you are the candidate or one of the candidates on a presidential ticket, you can give your campaign unlimited contributions. That's not true of anyone else in the presidential context. They're limited to $2,900 a person. But Shanahan can write enormous checks. And if they're going to be on the ballot everywhere, or even most places, they're going to need those checks, and they're going to need them right away because they're kind of behind the eight ball. So it seems to me, no doubt, they picked this woman because of her money.
Well, sounds kind of smart then, right? She was married till last year to Sergey Brin, who you referenced, the Google co-founder, who has a fortune estimated by Bloomberg News at $129 billion. What could that mean for the campaign?
Unless you have very bad lawyers, she's got a lot of that money. So yeah, I think it's smart from a political perspective because money helps in politics. But this is somebody that would be a heartbeat away from the presidency, and she has absolutely no qualifications whatsoever to be president of the United States. I mean, she's a lawyer and she's a financier of movies and stuff. I mean, she has literally no qualifications. And if you think about it, even the least qualified vice presidential candidates like Dan Quayle and Sarah Palin, at least they've been senators and governors. I mean, she's done nothing.
Yeah, right. Wow. Fascinating to see Donald Trump try to frame RFK as a super lib to the left of Joe Biden, he says. It reminds me of Democrats buying ads to lift up the MAGA candidate. Is he worried about RFK Jr. taking votes away?
I don't think Trump is spending a lot of time worrying about this, and he's probably right not to.
No?
But this strategy is wise on his part. I mean, what he really wants to do is ensure that RFK hurts Biden. And at the moment, it appears that that's the likely scenario. I mean, Trump's core support is very solid. It's low. His ceiling is pretty low, but his floor is really hard. And so it's unlikely that RFK or any other third-party candidate is going to hurt him much, but they definitely could hurt Biden.
Spending time with Matt Bennett from Third Way, where he's executive vice president and a frequent, as I mentioned, Democratic analyst on our panels here. Matt, it's not lost on me, and our viewers looking at you on YouTube here see that Hillary banner in the background. I was at that convention when they made those, and I'm just wondering, ahead of Joe Biden's appearance tonight with Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, I know this is about the three presidents. Are you surprised that Hillary is not a bigger part of this? Are you surprised that Bill Clinton is?
No, I'm not surprised by either of those things. I mean, Hillary Clinton is a huge and strong supporter of Joe Biden, and I have no doubt that she will do everything in her power to help him. But tonight was, the president's, and she's not a president. She came pretty close, about 40,000 votes, but she's not a former president, so I don't think it's a surprise. I'm also not the least bit surprised that Bill Clinton is helping Joe Biden. They're close allies. They always have been. Bill Clinton has been an advisor to President Biden throughout his time in office, and so I think this is a very natural thing that's happening tonight.
Yeah, there's been reporting he talks to Bill Clinton more often than Barack Obama. I'm just, thinking about the Me Too stuff. Just young people look at Bill Clinton, Matt, a lot differently than baby boomers do. Does he bring baggage to the stage, or you just don't look at it like that, knowing his fundraising prowess?
I don't think so. I mean, I think when you think about this in the context of this presidential election, you have one of the major party candidates who has been found by a court to be guilty of rape. So, look, I mean, I understand that there's some baggage connected to Clinton, not that. And also, I think he brings a lot of upside with him as well. He's a brilliant political mind, and he remains pretty popular, certainly among the Democratic base. So I think he's really going to help.
And a monster organizer, I know, when it comes to raising money. Certainly the influence through the Clinton Global Initiative is something that we have to acknowledge. Matt, I'm really glad you could join us today. Great to have you back. Come see us again in studio soon. Matt Bennett at Third Way, where they have been awfully busy on this no labels issue, and appreciate the insights from both Matt and the governor of Connecticut on the passing of Joe Lieberman. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Glad you're along on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. If you're not there already, find us by searching Bloomberg Global News. You'll find our live stream there. You'll even see Nancy Lyons, who joins us now with world and national headlines from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried says he is sorry for what happened while he defrauded investors on his cryptocurrency exchange. But following that statement today in court, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He was found guilty late last year on 7 federal counts of fraud and conspiracy. Federal prosecutors were seeking up to 50 years in prison for the 32-year-old for what they called the likely largest fraud of the last decade. Bankman-Fried's attorneys wanted closer to 6 years. A salvage firm that helped contain the Deepwater Horizon oil spill is heading to Baltimore to help refloat and remove the ship that smashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Coast Guard Vice Admiral Peter Gauthier.
The salver is Resolve Marine Incorporated, and they have begun mobilizing resources to take the next steps appropriate to refloat the vessel and remove it from that area.
Gauthier credits all those involved in the recovery effort for their aggressive response. New evidence shows the pilot of the ship that crashed into the bridge did call for help. The pilot radioed for tugboat help and reported a power loss just minutes before crashing into the bridge. The NTSB says the nearly 50-year-old span lacked structural engineering redundancies. Tonight's Radio City Music Hall fundraiser for President Biden is expected to raise a record $25 million. His campaign says it's the biggest haul ever for a political event. It not only stars Biden, but 2 other presidents, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. It will be moderated by talk show host Stephen Colbert. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's start with the news that Sam Bankman-Fried has been sentenced to 25 years in prison. The FTX co-founder, one-time billionaire, became a symbol of malfeasance and greed in the crypto world. As for markets, not a lot to see here. Tomorrow, market holiday that brings the Fed's preferred inflation measure. We're in kind of a holding pattern ahead of that. After another record close for the S&P 500 yesterday, the index little changed. And where do stocks go from here? Dan Morris at BNP Paribas looks to earnings.
There is a lot of earnings momentum, optimism, though particularly there it is more in U.S. growth stocks. You don't see that as much in other markets. So if there is a question mark about the outlook from here is whether or not equity indices broadly can continue to appreciate if you don't see a better pattern in terms of earnings expectations.
Right now, the S&P 500 up just 2 points, 52.50. That actually is a record if we keep on that pace today. Dow Jones Industrial Average 1 point lower. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 12 points. And Rite Aid and Amazon Pharmacy confirming Eli Lilly's new weight loss drug Zepbound is in short supply as patient, pharmacist, and doctor complaints mount. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Joe Matthew, balance of power continues right now. I can tell you, Joe, walking into work, lots and lots of security out there in the form of police presence as the, respectfully, I can call them the three amigos get together today in Manhattan.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Midtown's going to be shut down then, right? What happens in the... I know it's an evening event, but afternoon rush is going to be brutal.
I hate to bring it all back to me, but this is going to delay my commute home.
That's the idea.
If you're listening.
You may as well stay for the show. Are the Rockettes part of this? I haven't heard about what's happening on the stage.
I have no idea what the lineup is, but yeah, why not?
Guessing not. I'm guessing not. But big night, Radio City. Look for Mr. Tucker. Thank you for the update, sir. We'll get back to John in a little bit for an update on trading here, but we will be talking about that fundraiser. Pretty remarkable stuff here. $100,000 for a photograph with the three amigos, as John calls them. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Glad you came along today. Feels like Friday because it is the last business day of the week for some, certainly for the markets, with Good Friday tomorrow. So welcome to Thursday. Our panel is with us. I'm glad to report Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are back, Bloomberg Politics contributors, our signature panel. As we digest the news from No Labels, they have struck out again on finding a candidate. This time, Chris Christie, if you were with us, you heard us talking about this with Matt Bennett. They've been working overtime at Third Way to stop this from happening. And boy, it seems like maybe they don't need to be. Joe Manchin said no. Bill Cassidy said no. Mitt Romney said no. Dean Phillips said no. Former Governors Nikki Haley, Larry Hogan, John Huntsman all said no. Even former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan of Georgia said no. Now Chris Christie. So either we're going to the back of the bench here or we need to reevaluate what's happening. Rick Davis, what's next, if anything, for No Labels?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, as you point out, almost in every situation, once it's been vetted out in the public that these candidates are being recruited by No Labels and that No Labels have been telling donors in many cases that, you know, these are the individuals that they want to put on their ticket, that they, regardless of what we know of as any kind of thought pattern around it, go publicly pretty quickly and say, no, don't count me in. And of course, every poll we see is irrelevant until you affix a name on that, you know, presidential and vice presidential ticket. And so I think that they must be in a bit of a scramble. We haven't heard much about the selection process. Of course, it wasn't much of a process. I mean, in other words, they were going to have a convention and they decided not to have a convention and they were going to have this, you know, group put together. We've heard nothing from the group about who they're selecting or what the timetable will be. So my guess is they're running into the typical problem. Politics. It gets in the way of a good plan.
Well, so Jeannie, are you kind of moving this to the back burner here? Matt Bennett sounds like they're still concerned about it at Third Way. But my goodness, what would actually make a dent at this point?
Yeah, I think they are right to be concerned about it. I think the sign that all of these people you listed, and these are people who have very, very quickly, like Chris Christie, listened to this pitch and said no, that is a good sign, I think. But of course, they do have to be concerned, not just about no labels, but about any third party challenge. And, it's not just the Democrats and Biden who have to be concerned. I was looking at Truth Social a few days ago, as I like to do for you, Joe, and we saw Donald Trump. I think it was like, you're welcome. I think it was like 1:30 a.m. or something when Donald and I are up, not together, just up separately. He is posting on Truth Social about RFK Jr. And, it's a pretty stark language, as he likes to use. So I think there is concern by both the Biden and the Trump campaigns that even a small number of votes in a few key states can prove critical for them. And so no labels is something to watch, although at this point they don't have a candidate, so it's still a little ways off.
That's for sure. It is interesting to see Donald Trump trying to frame RFK Jr. as a super liberal left of Joe Biden now. And I'm sure a lot of folks will listen to that when they, look at his last name, especially if they aren't too sure who he is. When we consider no labels, though, Matt Bennett is right. Nancy Jacobson is still ahead of this. But without Joe Lieberman, you do wonder what's happening inside the organization. And I know that you spent a lot of years with Joe Lieberman, a great friend of John McCain. What were your thoughts when you heard of his passing last night?
It was sad. The country has taken a step back. Joe Lieberman, what a patriot. He was just a wonderful person, a selfless human being. He was a founding board member of the McCain Institute, served with me for the last 12 years in that. And I put a lot of mileage on with the three amigos, and we're missing the two amigos that are now together. And I wish we had their guidance and leadership. Joe was somebody who would always do things for the right reason, right? He always put his country ahead of his party and public service ahead of his own self-interest. So you can't find very many people like him anymore. And he was a real driving force in the no labels movement. I mean, there were many members of Congress who would take it seriously when he called and said, this is what we want to do. And he really was a constructive force in sort of their bipartisan approach to legislation. But on the political front, this will be tough for them to recover from.
What do you think of this as a Democrat, Jeannie? Everyone's trying to frame the life of Joe Lieberman this morning, knowing that he left the party. He was an independent at the end of his tenure here, and he's been giving a lot of Democrats agita over this no labels issue in his final days on this earth. How will you remember Joe Lieberman?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Connecticut. He was my state senator. He also, was a legislator for many years at the state level and our attorney general. So I knew him. I had met him, but I knew him as a constituent primarily. And you're right. He does have this falling out with the Democratic Party, which leads him to run as an independent successfully before he retired in 2013. But I think for me, when I was thinking back when we heard about his loss yesterday, was the fact that he was the one Democrat who stood up in the Senate when the whole issue with Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky was raised. He raised this motion to censure that was, failed and may have put off, by the way, an impeachment had it succeeded. But this was a man of deep principle, an Orthodox Jew, very, very civil, a wonderful, gregarious person, as Rick was just talking about. He was also a man of deep morals and principle. And, I think back to that shocking moment when he stood up in the Senate and called for the censure of his friend and president of his party in the United States.
Yeah, right.
But 20 years later, as the Me Too era erupted, we look back at that and said he was 100% right to do that. You cannot have relations with an intern anywhere, especially in the Oval Office. And, you look at now Liz Cheney, who did the same thing with her party. So it's a big loss when people are willing to take an unpopular stand with their party. and who are willing to lose their seats over it, step up and do that. And that was Joe Lieberman. That is Liz Cheney. We don't have a lot of those people as we look at the parties today, but they are people that we should remember for their willingness to say, I'm going to say the unpopular out loud.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts on that, both of you. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzana will be back next hour as we continue our way through this Thursday, our signature panel on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington as we anticipate the big gig tonight in New York. We've been talking about it over the course of the hour. Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, referred to several times already as the three amigos on stage at Radio City Hall. Bloomberg White House correspondent Josh Wingrove is with us. $100,000 picture?
Well, if you want all three, it's like a tiered package, right?
Is that like a new all-time high for this kind of thing?
Well, you didn't shell out? I was kind of wondering.
Well, I haven't yet. I mean, I guess there's time.
No, it's these are sort of the things where you can like upgrade, like Costco,
Sure.
To the Uber Black membership or whatever.
Glad to know that.
This is a big deal. This is, $25 million in one day from this fundraiser alone. For context, that's more than half than that Biden normally raises in a month.
Yeah.
That's double what Trump raised last month.
There you go.
These are big numbers, and of course is a sign that we're going to start seeing, I think, maybe not immediately, but over the course, certainly between now and November, more of Barack Obama on the trail as the Biden campaign more or less looks to remind the Democrats that they're Democrats and that they need to come out and vote. Remember, Biden's whole challenge really here is of turnout. Trump tends to have a more fervent but smaller base. Biden's camp thinks they can win more or less if their people show up. And so that's the lens that all these events are through. But they're just today seeing Obama on Air Force One. Aides are tweeting all about it. It's partly perhaps a morale factor as well for Biden land.
I'm sure that's right. And for everyone in the room there tonight. It's been reported that Joe Biden has a better relationship with Bill Clinton, that he actually provides counsel more often than his former boss, Barack Obama, where the relationship has been a little complicated. Is that fair?
I think it depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
The Times had a good piece on that this week that people should read if they haven't. Obama and Biden were reported to have, chills at times, and there were moments where they were out of step with each other in a way that we really haven't seen with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden since then. I think Biden has taken some of those lessons into his own presidency, but I think they agree on one thing, and that's Donald Trump. And so, there are reports that they've sort of warmed more in the last, 8 or so years from maybe a chill towards the end of their actual presidency together, the Obama presidency. But right now, I think you feel from Democrats that Trump sort of transcends any sort of petty grievance that might exist. Of course, the root of the beef was that Joe Biden kind of felt maybe a lack of support from Obama's orbit when he was considering whether to run in 2016. That decision, of course, came just after the death or right around the death of his son, Beau Biden. So there was some nerves, I think, around people around Biden, people around Obama. How much those nerves were the men themselves depends on who you ask.
Who's in the room tonight?
It's a great question. I wish I had a better answer for you on it. It's a
Not
big
everybody
room,
can
though.
afford this.
It is a big. Not everyone can. I certainly can't afford it. No,
You're a
I won't
parent,
be there.
for God's sake.
That's right. Daycare costs, Joe. They're wild. It's a good question. It's a big room. Radio City Music Hall.
Sure.
I think we're going to expect a lot of people there.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see what it is. But right now, they are trying to really hit both ends of the spectrum. Small dollar donors. As well as the bigger checks. Think people like paying $100,000 for a photo.
Yes, right.
I think I saw reported that Annie Leibovitz is doing the photos too. So that's a little cherry on top. We'll see. I don't know, but I'm trusting what I read here, Joe. Yeah, so
excellent.
So, but one nugget that the campaign was excited about is about a third of the people donating to Biden in February didn't donate to his 2020 campaign. And as we try to figure out, what people are thinking, are the polls right? Is it too early? A lot of polls show Trump leading. Biden looks like he has a bit of momentum. There are data points there that point to at least the path of a potential Biden rebound.
I ask you who's going to be there because there's going to be a Republican ad with celebrities all over the big money and the Rockettes, and this is the elitist party. Their answer will be small dollar donations that have actually been drying up more recently for Donald Trump.
Well, yes, and the Republican attacks already on this, I should note, are that Biden is so desperate that he has to bring Obama out of the bullpen.
Sure, yeah.
So I think we'll see a mix of these. But this is an election that will be fought throughout roughly the middle of the country, more so than the coast of the country.
I think Biden, if he was sitting here, would say that he knows that as well or better than anyone.
Yep.
So yeah, this is a risk. But Biden right now has a big cash advantage. I mean, like both the campaign itself in terms of how much money is coming in, how much they've stockpiled, and what those outer groups, PACs and whatnot, have pledged. Biden's got much, much, much more money, and of course isn't spending any of it on legal cases.
Right.
But before we draw too many conclusions, remember Hillary Clinton had advantages, huge advantages on cash as well. Didn't work out
King
for
of
her.
free media. We're out of time, but is she going to be there tonight? I haven't heard Hillary Clinton named.
Well, maybe I should write a story if she is. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like that would also be a curious element.
Well, we see the conspiracy theories, right? That she'll be the late-minute swap candidate.
Right, yeah.
Don't bank on
Will,
that.
will Michelle Obama
Won't
be there?
be Michelle Obama.
I keep
it
hearing
won't
that
be
as
Hillary
well.
Clinton.
Okay, fine.
You know, we'll see. But one day at a time on these things, Joe.
Have a wonderful holiday weekend with your family.
Thank you. You
Thank
as
you
well.
for being with us, as always, known on this program as Clark Kent. That is Josh Wingrove, Bloomberg White House correspondent. I'm Joe Matthew. Hey, Kaylee is on the way in. We'll have the panel back as well next hour, Rick and Jeannie, and an important conversation as we drive forward here on Balance of Power with Cliff Young from Ipsos Polling, with an eye on the campaign trail in this massive, potentially record fundraiser tonight. Stay with us on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. We'll invite our TV audience next hour here only on Bloomberg.
of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Sam Bankman-Fried gets 25 years, and consumer sentiment hits the highest level since July. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington alongside Kaylee Lyons, back with us at the table today. Kaylee, we've got a couple of important stories bringing us back to a former life of yours here in the sentencing of SBF. It's actually one that connects Washington and Wall Street in a lot of ways.
It absolutely does, as Sam Bankman-Fried was a major political donor. He made millions of dollars in political donations to Democrats mostly, but Republicans as well, and of course was well known on Capitol Hill advocating for the crypto industry. He was the poster boy, the golden child for a very long time, Joe, until it all came crumbling down, ultimately resulting in the bankruptcy of the exchange that he founded, FTX, and of course then was uncovered what he was convicted of, which was a massive $10 billion fraud.
We're going to talk to Bloomberg correspondent Dave Gura, who is at the courthouse today, as a matter of fact. And Kaylee, we're going to talk later with Cliff Young as well, ahead of this massive fundraiser tonight in New York City. Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, $25 million, and now the infamous $100,000 photo.
Yes, with all three presidents. You have to pay up. But that is actually $25 million more money than the Trump campaign brought in the entire month of February. So we're going to have much more on that. There's a lot to get to today. But of course, we also have to check on financial markets. And we've got that up in New York with John Tucker. Hey.
Hey, Kaylee, how are you? Sam Bankman-Fried, just to remind everybody, sentenced to 25 years in prison. Of course, we're on top of that, and we'll bring you much more as the program continues. As for markets, it's the end of an historic quarter, where we saw another record close for the S&P 500 yesterday. Rally has added $4 trillion to U.S. stock investors in just 3 months. And today, we're in something of a holding pattern. That's because investors want to get a taste of the latest inflation data. We're going to get that in the form of the core PCE tomorrow. That's on a day when Wall Street is actually closed for the long holiday weekend. The reaction to the Fed's preferred inflation measure, that's going to have to wait for Monday's market session. We do have some Fed speak ahead of that. Federal Reserve Governor Chris Waller saying he wants to see at least a couple months of better inflation data before cutting rates. Two-year yields right now 4 basis points higher, 4.6% on that more policy-reactive end of the curve. The bond market actually set to close 2 p.m. Wall Street time today. Swaps traders also trimming their bets on Fed easing. And as far as markets, S&P 500 up 2, the Dow up 13, the NASDAQ Composite Index 22 points lower. Some of the individual shares on the move. Home Depot shares down about 0.5%. Forget the schmoes like yours truly. Home Depot betting on the pros, making its biggest acquisition ever to win over more professional contractors. The world's largest home improvement retailer buying SRS distribution for $18.25 billion. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues right now. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much with a look at all the price action today. And of course, the price action specifically in crypto has been something to behold in the last several months, Joe. We're now talking about Bitcoin that is above $70,000. But that was not the case just a few years ago. There was a really dark period at the end of 2021.
Crypto winter.
The crypto winter began. And of course, it included the bankruptcy of FTX. But it's worth noting that what happened with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried did not happen in a vacuum. There had been a lot of volatility, other collapses in the industry from Terra USD to Three Arrows. It was just a really dark period of time, and a lot of people lost a lot of money, including people who had money tied up in FTX, even if they are now trying to get that back in the bankruptcy. But that is, of course, what really was at the heart of Sam Bankman-Fried's conviction of 7 counts, including fraud and conspiracy, and then ultimately the sentencing today.
Yeah, it's been a remarkable journey. And then to come on the terminal today and see this story about MicroStrategy, now worth more than half the companies in the S&P 500 based purely on the gains in Bitcoin. And of course, Michael Saylor kept buying through that whole period of time. It's amazing the rise and fall here, or the fall and rise, depending on the company and scenario you're talking about. We're going to go to New York right now. David Gura is with us, correspondent for Bloomberg and also host of the Big Take podcast. Has been outside the courthouse since the sentencing. David, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so a dramatic verdict here, 25 years for Sam Bankman-Fried. He'll have to forfeit $11 billion. So this is kind of in the middle of what the defense was asking for, 6.5 years or less, and the prosecution was asking for 40 to 50 years. But Judge Lewis Kaplan here in New York saying these were very serious crimes. And as he went through the calculus of what to sentence Sam Bankman-Fried with, had to do two things. Yes, be punitive, punish Sam Bankman-Fried for that massive fraud that you were talking about just a moment ago, but also send a message to folks in crypto, but in finance more broadly, that if they commit frauds like this, concoct schemes like this, there will be pretty harsh penalties. And going back to what you were talking about just a moment ago, so much of what Sam Bankman-Fried tried to do during the course of the trial and when he addressed the court today was blame what had happened on these circumstances, broader circumstances in the crypto market. So yes, what the involvement of Three Arrows and other companies, and that was a period of time, if you remember, when Sam Bankman-Fried was playing this kind of white knight role. FTX was helping out or buying out a lot of these companies. The prosecutor today, the judge, both very emphatic that what we had here was a very directed, deliberate fraud. Yes, there were these externalities, but that doesn't explain what happened both with SBF and with FTX as well, guys.
Well, and David, it's worth keeping in mind that we've talked extensively here on Balance of Power about the influence that he had in the political realm, the donations that he made, his activism, if you will, or advocacy on Capitol Hill. But he also spent a great deal of time doing media interviews. I have to admit that I myself conducted multiple interviews with Sam Bankman-Fried before all of this unraveled. And even after FTX was bankrupt and all of this was starting to come out, he was still doing interviews, telling people in the media he never intended to commit fraud on anybody, still trying to be, you know, some of that charismatic, sympathetic character, if you will. Did that backfire on him here? Did it not really translate to when he was on the stand and what he was telling the jury, of course, back in the fall and the judge today?
Absolutely. So going back to the trial, he made this bold decision to testify in his own defense, one that I think backfired for the reasons you just described. That is, he seemed so comfortable on stage at a business conference, testifying in front of congressmen. That wasn't the case in the courtroom where there were interruptions and objections. And then today we saw kind of the same thing. You know, you mentioned those interviews. I saw the ones that you did and others after FTX collapsed. He was so quick to blame the bankruptcy proceedings for what was happening. He was upset that he wasn't involved, that John Ray rebuffed his overtures to become involved in those bankruptcy proceedings. Even today, I mean, I think what a lot of people wanted to hear from him was a very explicit apology. It wasn't in the sentencing memo that the defense supplied to the court. Certainly it didn't come up during the course of the trial. We thought we might get it when he began to address the court today, but it devolved into sort of the same talking points that you mentioned that we heard so many times, that, again, there were these externalities that caused the collapse of FTX. He made mistakes. Mistakes were made, to use the passive voice, but it wasn't his fault explicitly. And fundamentally, I think that was something that really turned off the judge, as it has throughout the course of the entire trial, and it's something he brought up right before he announced that sentence, imposed that sentence today, that, you know, up until this point, yes, it hasn't been that long. It's hard to believe that, you know, this collapse happened and the trial happened in just a matter of just a few short years. We still haven't gotten an unequivocal apology from Sam Bankman-Fried, and we didn't get one of those today either.
All right, David Gura, Bloomberg correspondent, host of the Big Take podcast outside of the court in New York. Thank you so much. And actually, just moments ago, a note dropped in my inbox, Joe, from our good friend Terry Haynes over at Pangea Policy about Sam Bankman-Fried and what he calls the myth/hype of crypto political power. He said even when crypto was briefly thought to be cool in Washington before the FTX and Binance difficulties, it was only cool because it was splashing campaign fundraising money around in Congress and presidential campaigns. Crypto mistook the resulting smiles and expressions of gratitude for influence and power.
He calls that a common misperception in Washington. Terry's always got his finger on it, and we'll keep you posted as we learn more. I want to know more about the facility he ends up in.
Yeah, they
this
said
being a white-collar crime.
Potentially close to family out in California.
He's been in Rikers Island, right, for the past several months, so a bit of a lifestyle change from the Bahamas.
Yeah, indeed.
She is Kaylee Lyons. I'm Joe Matthew. We're in Washington. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to have you with us today. As we turn back to the campaign trail, Kaylee, we've been talking about this monster event tonight at Radio City. Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, both on stage with the President of the United States. They're going to raise $25 million, thanks in part to a photo line. If you want a photograph with all three, by the way, we're told by our own Josh Wingrove that Annie Leibovitz herself is going to be taking the photographs. $100,000 for one picture. That's how you get that kind of money. And to your point, that's what, twice what Donald Trump pulled in a month, something like that?
20 million he pulled in February in the entire month.
So
and
one
then
night versus 1
million.
month.
Yeah.
Remarkable. With our eyes on the trail, I'm glad to say Cliff Young is with us from Ipsos. We refer to his polling and his research so often, and we've got a lot of questions for Cliff today. It's great to see you. Welcome back to the table. Nice to see you in Washington today.
It's great to be here.
So this fundraiser tonight brings our attention back to a general election campaign that everyone seems to have settled on. I'm going to ask you some questions about RFK Jr., but what we're hearing from No Labels is nobody wants to run. Are you settled on Trump v. Biden?
I think it's going to be Trump v. Biden. There could be a third candidate, but those are the two primary front runners on each side. We're ratcheting up now, and we have a campaign, we have a dispute in front of us.
Well, as we talk about Trump and Biden, Joe mentioned at the very top of the hour that we did get consumer sentiment data today. It's the highest since 2021. It's improving. We actually saw the biggest improvement within a month going back to 2022. It does seem like feelings around the economy are starting to improve. The question is, does Biden's prospects really improve with them? How close is that connection really?
Yeah, this campaign, this electoral year was always going to be a very close one. We never had any doubt in respect to that. Obviously, time's not in Biden's favor. Anytime an incumbent's down because of the economy, the question is, can you gain that ground quickly enough? But what's happening now is what we expect. And the economy's improving. People perceive that. And we're beginning to see, at least on the Biden side, glimmers of hope when it comes to numbers.
Fascinating. The RFK factor is a real one, or at least it could be. You did some research just about a week ago on this. He has since named a running mate, and we can talk more about the direction of his campaign. But when I start hearing Donald Trump try to frame the narrative around RFK Jr., calling him left of Joe Biden, I'm starting to think that he's worried about this. Should he take it seriously?
He should. Listen, first and foremost, RFK represents a disaffected middle. Whether it be 10%, 16%, somewhere in between. At Ipsos, sometimes we ask the question without the name, a nondescript third-party individual, we get 10%.
Just option C.
It's just option, the other option, right, beside the two.
Anyone.
Anyone else but these two, right? But ultimately, there is a disaffected middle, right? But that disaffected middle tends to be a little right of center, at least by our polling. Tends to be a little bit more conservative, tends to be a little bit more female, a little bit more suburban. Maybe the Dobbs decision had an effect. So I think there should be worries on Trump's side. Obviously, it's Biden's job to mobilize these disaffected voters because they're really more likely to be his voters than Trump's. But that said, it makes total sense the way in which Trump is framing it today.
Well, you talk about mobilization of these voters, and I wonder if the question we should be asking is not how many people will turn out to vote for RFK Jr. or any third-party candidate, whatever option C, or whether they're just going to decide not to vote, because theoretically that's I just wonder if the choice is more, do I vote or do I vote for this other person, rather than do I vote for this other person over Trump or Biden? Because are these individuals going to vote for Trump or Biden in any case?
Yeah, it's both, right? That third option in part represents aspirations. And so some of those that aspire to a third-party individual, third-party candidate, won't vote on Election Day. Polling tends to overstate the third-party candidate, both in the United States and around the world. We see that everywhere. I think it will minimize a bit, narrow a bit. It'll come down to sort of, I think, single-digit numbers by Election Day. But ultimately, it represents both those that would not vote and those that would want to vote for a third-party candidate.
Nicole Shanahan is his pick for running mate. Of course, is married till just last year to Sergey Brin, worth $129 billion. She is going to have the ability to donate an unlimited amount of cash as an actual candidate on the ticket to this campaign. Does that make it more legitimate? Are you expecting it to be on the ballot in all 50 states?
It's very, very difficult to get on the ballot in all 50 states, especially now. It takes time, and there are a lot of limitations, a lot of barriers to entry when it comes to third-party candidates getting on the ballot. Obviously, money helps, and a lot of money helps even more.
That's right.
But ultimately, it's going to be about resonance with public opinion. And once again, we can't minimize the importance of the anti-vote, the anti-Trump vote, the anti-Biden vote. At the end of the day, you might be disaffected, but do you really want Trump to win, or do you really want Biden to win? Are you really going to throw away your vote when it comes to your anti-candidate feelings?
I often get told when I ask questions about voter sentiment that not everyone's paying as much attention as we are here in Washington. Obviously, we've been enmeshed in this for what feels like forever, and we will continue to be so. But a lot of people are probably just now tuning in, seeing that there is someone with the Kennedy name who is running. And I just wonder to what extent you think the support he may be drawing now will actually be lasting once the public gets to know him better, whether it is just kind of a name recognition thing we may be seeing right now.
I think it's partially that. Once again, our experience, whether it be in the United States or in other countries with third-party candidates, they tend to taper off as you get closer to Election Day. And it is the case that people are not paying attention at this point. Therefore, we should be very careful with the horse race polls. The horse race polls are fuzzy at best. Other indicators like the main problem and approval ratings are probably better leading indicators of what will happen. But ultimately, we have to understand where we are. We're 7 months out.
Kayleigh mentions consumer sentiment today. Our Bloomberg News poll that came out a couple of days ago actually showed improvement in the 7 swing states, or at least several key states for Joe Biden, including Wisconsin. Is the trajectory in his favor based on your research? You look a couple of months down the road, where's it going to be?
I expect this trend. Listen, these elections in the United States are very, very close presidential elections. We have to remember that historically speaking. There's no way that Trump was going to win by as much as the polls are suggesting. This was a lag effect, in my opinion, inertial effect of inflation. And the economy is improving, and that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing sort of glimmers of hope in some ways when it comes to the economy. You're less likely to punish the executive in power at the time, that is Biden at this point. And your numbers and all the numbers are suggesting this more positive trend for the Biden camp.
All right, Cliff Young of Ipsos, always great to have you here in our Washington studio. We appreciate your time, and it's worth considering, Joe, as we continue to get this economic data in, including tomorrow when you and I won't be working because it is a holiday and the markets will be closed, but we're still going to get PCE data and hear from Chairman Powell. And we know that interest rates and where they are come November when voters are heading to the polls could make a massive difference.
That's absolutely right. We'll have special coverage on Bloomberg Radio 8:30 when that PCE data are released, and we'll be, of course, carrying that into next week. This endless conversation about the economy stacked up against a lot of other issues. We'll assemble our panel next. Kayleigh, Rick, and Jeannie coming in.
All right, that's next on Bloomberg TV and Trade.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. To recap our top story, FTX co-founder Sam Bankman-Fried sentenced to 25 years in prison. As for stocks, a little change right now as we await the Fed's preferred inflation report. That comes tomorrow, when actually the market's closed. In the S&P 500, 7 of the 11 major industry groups right now, they are higher. Energy shares in the lead. And then you have information technology and communication services. Those two groups are the biggest drags right now, and that's the home of Meta and Google parent Alphabet. Both of those stocks lower right now. U.S. consumer sentiment rising toward the end of the month, supported by strong stock market gains and expectations that the rate of inflation will continue to ease. The University of Michigan Sentiment Index climbing to 79.4. Among some of the individual movers today, Andretti Acquisition. This is the blank check company started by the former IndyCar driver Michael Andretti, climbing as much as 80%. Pretty volatile trading session. This follows the completion of its combination with artificial intelligence startup Zapata AI. Right now, the S&P 500 up 1 point. Dow Jones Industrial Average 6 points lower. The NASDAQ right now 28 points lower. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
Thank you, sir. John Tucker with us. We'll check the markets again a little bit later on this hour. I'm Joe Matthew, along with Kaylee Lyons. There you are, here in Washington, as we continue our conversation ahead of the big gig tonight, Radio City. Rockettes aren't going to be there, right?
Not to my knowledge.
Joe Biden will. Barack Obama will. Bill Clinton will. Annie Leibovitz will. Introducing the $100,000 photograph. People will be in line for it tonight in Midtown Manhattan. Can you imagine the traffic that's coming?
Oh, it's going to be absolutely brutal. My deepest sympathies to everyone who has to work their way through New York City tonight. Jeannie Shanzano might be one of them.
That's a good point.
Half of our signature political panel is joining us from New York. Rick Davis, of course, as always, is alongside her. So, Jeannie, I don't know what you're bracing for this evening. What we do know, though, for sure, is that a lot of money will be raised, $25 million. What does it say that Biden is going to be able to pull that amount in one night, when it's more than Donald Trump raised in the entire month of February?
Yeah, so gridlock alert day here. It's like the UN coming to town, but I think worse. And they have Queen Latifah, Stephen Colbert, Lizzo, all the players are here. We'll have to see who else. And that's why they're drawing this big money. And you know, it is in keeping with what we've been talking about the Biden team. As his poll numbers have sagged up a little bit, we saw in the Bloomberg Morning Council poll the other day, his money and his fundraising is coming in strong. And the number of people who are contributing, who didn't contribute in 2020, is a really important indicator, as are the small money donors. And of course, this picture is worth $100,000. It is historic, and it's worth, you know, everything in gold for the Biden team. That, you know, if this is a campaign that's going to be won or lost depending on turnout of your base, there is no other way to, or no better way, I should say, to get the base out than have Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, and Barack Obama together like this. It's an enormous show of support for the campaign, and they've got to be thrilled so far with how this is rolling out.
Rick Davis, you made an ad back in 2008 called Celebrity when you were running the John McCain campaign. I'll never forget it. It got an enormous amount of free play. I don't even know if you bought time because I saw it 1,000 times in 1,000 places. And the idea was you put Paris Hilton in that ad, that this was a celebrity-infused campaign, that it was out of touch with mainstream America. Is there going to be another version of an ad like that come this weekend, showing the elite getting together for this massive multi-million-dollar fundraiser in Midtown Manhattan?
I guess you could make that claim. We certainly were more pivoting off of the incredibly warm reception that candidate Barack Obama got in Europe when he went over there. Much bigger crowds than he was getting in the United States. And we were desperate for attention. And so when desperate for attention, call Paris Hilton. I think that you can certainly maybe see this as a celebrity event. I think Annie Leibovitz is probably the biggest celebrity out of the group. I never think of presidents as celebrities, right? I mean, Washington is Hollywood for ugly people, and so maybe it's the ugly celebrity contest tonight. But the bottom line is he's going to get a lot of attention. We're part of the plan to give it to him. But more importantly, he's going to get a lot of money out of this. And this is incredibly important at this stage. This period of time between now and the convention is the time when these campaigns have to sock away a lot of money. And Joe Biden has the dual problem of not only raising all that money, which he'll do a lot of tonight, but he has to use some of it between now and the convention to improve his standing in order to be competitive in the fall election. And so tonight is a big night toward that end.
Well, Rick, this is one of the things that I find a bit puzzling is that Biden has shown much more fundraising prowess at this point than Trump or the RNC for that matter. They're pulling in significantly more, but he's still lagging behind. So I just wonder how we should be viewing the difference between ability to fundraise versus voter enthusiasm. What does it say when people are willing to give you money, but not enough people say they're willing to give you their vote?
Yeah, look, I mean, the two campaigns have had exactly the opposite of what you call inflows. In other words, the kinds of information that's coming at you every week gets evaluated. Is it negative or positive? As President of the United States, Joe Biden has had horrible inflows, right? I mean, whether it's inflation or the war in Gaza, he has to take that as part of his campaign. And so he has that problem. With Donald Trump, his inflows look ugly, right? They look like they should be all these horrible things that are happening to him in the legal system. But that's actually been helpful to him in consolidating his base and making the claim that the deep state's after him. And so his inflows, even though to the general audience look horrific, they're actually working for him. So Biden has to buy inflows, right? He has to go out and purchase airtime to have a better message than what he's getting out of being president of the United States. And Donald Trump doesn't have to do that. So onus is on Biden. He's got to get in the campaign. And up until a month ago, he wasn't running much of a campaign. Now he's on the air in the key states, and he's starting to improve his numbers. That's just simple political math.
We're spending time on Balance of Power with our signature panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. We've got news, Jeannie, not on the campaign, but on Capitol Hill, and an important date that I want to throw at you. April 10th is when articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas will be walked across the rotunda from the House to the Senate. Is the Senate going to put this to death as soon as it arrives? What's the plan?
Yeah, it's fascinating that they are going to do this because, of course, it is just another example of the House focused on something that has no chance of going anywhere. And so April 10th, they bring these over, whether Schumer decides that they're going to hold a full trial, which I doubt, or as you mentioned, just vote to dismiss these charges immediately. They could also refer it to a committee. So he has some options there. But this is going nowhere. And the House focusing on this as opposed to focusing on, say, funding Ukraine, funding Israel. The other really important things they need to do is sort of part and parcel of this, do nothing House that we have seen. And I just want to remind my friend Rick Davis that I said Queen Latifah, Lizzo. Those are bigger stars. I mean, I love Annie Leibovitz, but for the young folks, those are pretty big stars, Rick Davis.
Yep.
The pop culture.
Grab your flute.
Part of Balance of Power.
That's correct.
Today. We did get a statement on the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. A statement from the Senate Majority Leader's office. He says, as we've said previously, after the House impeachment managers present the articles to the Senate, senators will be sworn in as jurors in the trial the next day. Senate President pro tempore Patty Murray will preside. So there you have it. Of course, we'll wait for April 10th to see how all of this plays out. But Jeannie mentioned there, Rick, the idea that this is something that lawmakers are spending their time on when there's still outstanding issues, including funding for Ukraine. Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, posted on X today that he spoke with Speaker Johnson, thanked him for their critical support to Ukraine, briefed him on the battlefield situation. And he says, in this situation, quick passage of aid to Ukraine by Congress is vital. Is President Zelensky likely to get it? Is the calculus here changing if he's speaking directly with the speaker?
Yeah, the way I read the tea leaves on Capitol Hill right before they took off for the Easter break is that more and more of the people that matter, and that includes Speaker Johnson, are talking about what the terms are that will result in passage of a supplemental bill to support Ukraine and the other states described in the bill, but much less than what was happening, which is the opposition to having anything passed. So my guess is we're seeing the great two-step of Washington, which is, hey, we're against this. We've got other things we got to do. We can't do this. To, hey, we're finding a pathway through this. And so my guess is we're going to see funding for Ukraine in the when the Congress returns. And yet it may not be the same amount, and it may not be in the same mechanism. I just remind everybody that this money is actually going to go for U.S. jobs to manufacture these weapon systems that then get shipped over to Ukraine. The money doesn't go to Ukraine. It goes to the U.S. companies building and equipping the Ukraine military. And so I'm shocked, actually, that there isn't more of an effort on the part of Ukraine and those who support their efforts here in the United States to make this point and to push harder for that kind of support in U.S. job creation.
That's why I still think this gets repackaged and renamed, Jeannie, whether it's in the form of a loan or whatever we decide here for Ukraine. It's going to be the U.S. Defense Industrial Investment Act. Would it pass with a different pitch?
Yeah, look at you at the acronyms, Joe. Very good. I think it would. That is what they need to do. And also, of course, we have to remember that when the speaker puts this on the floor, if he does, which I suspect he will, because he said he might, he is going to be risking his job. And, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene are in their districts right now for the Easter and holiday recess. And they are working and they're talking to constituents. So when they get back, we're going to see if there is more support for her motion to vacate the speaker. Yeah. And it is this issue of Ukraine that has motivated that. And of course, to pass, it's going to have to pass in a bipartisan way.
Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzana will be back with us in the late edition of Balance of Power at 5 p.m. Washington time. Great to have both of you with us here as we turn to world and national news. For that, Nancy Lyons joins in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Hey, Joe. Crypto mogul Sam Bankman-Fried has been sentenced to 25 years in prison for orchestrating what prosecutors framed as likely the largest fraud of the last decade. Prosecutors had argued he should receive as many as 50 years in prison because of the $10 billion in losses. Speaking to the court ahead of that sentence, Bankman-Fried said he was sorry for his actions. Efforts are underway to clear the debris around the container ship that collided with a Baltimore bridge Tuesday. The boat, the Dolly, is carrying about 4,700 containers. DHL supply chain CEO Oscar DeBach tells Bloomberg some of those containers were shipped through his company, but he says the bridge collapse will have a minimal impact on the overall supply chain.
While the impact to the port itself is dramatic, while obviously the event itself is tragic, but the overall impact on the global supply chain and the U.S. supply chain, I think will not be as large as you would fear.
DHL supply chain CEO Oscar DeBach. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Just to recap our top story, FTX co-founder Sam Bankman-Fried sentenced to 25 years in prison. Our coverage will continue. In markets, we're set up to wrap up the first quarter of 2024. Stocks right now, a little changed. Traders could be in something of a holding pattern that comes ahead of the Fed's preferred measure of inflation. That's the core PCE. That is tomorrow. Incidentally, a day when markets are off. We also hear from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. We're going to have to wait for Monday's trading session for the reaction to all that. Today, the bond market closing 2 p.m. Wall Street time. As far as some of the individual mover, Apple stock moving down after DZ Bank downgrading the iPhone maker from buy to hold, lowering the price target as well from 210 to 180. Well, the shares do remain sharply below their long-term 200-day moving average. Apple shares right now, they're down 1.25%. Overall, the market, Dow Jones Industrial Average up 13 points, S&P 500 up just 3, and the NASDAQ Composite Index 18 points lower. Mortgage rates in the U.S. declining, helping to ease affordability. The average for a 30-year fixed loan, 6.79%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues with Joe and Kaylee.
All right, John Tucker, thank you very much. I am indeed Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Television and Radio, where, of course, we always appreciate it when John runs us through what's happening in financial markets because it does have an impact on politics, especially if you're an incumbent president seeking re-election. More specifically, what's happening with oil prices, we might be able to say.
The wild card?
I wouldn't call this a stealth rally because it's been going on for some time, but we're back at the highest level since October.
Isn't that something?
For WTI, almost $83 a barrel. And obviously that is going to translate to the price paid at the pump, a pretty visible sign of inflation to the American people.
You wonder when the oil stocks start to follow. Well, I guess they've started to pop a little bit. But yeah, so I paid $3.29 to fill up yesterday.
Okay.
In Northern Virginia, so D.C. area. AAA's got a forecast of $4 this summer. We're back to a 4 handle right when people are starting to make up their minds or at least pay attention to this presidential cycle.
Yeah, not great news for President Biden, who, of course, throughout his administration has been fighting very hard against higher oil prices, including the tapping of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, encouraging American oil companies as well as OPEC, other countries, to pump more oil.
We talked to Bob McNally quite a bit around that time when they were draining a good chunk of the SPR. Rapidan Energy is his company where he's president, formerly in the Bush White House. And he's with us now, Bob. It's good to see you. Do you buy into this $4 a gallon forecast for summer?
Hi, Joe and Kaylee. In many parts of the country, yes. You know, Rapidan's forecast on an annual average basis, or I should say national average basis, is more like 380. But 380 nationally is still, you know, in some swing states like Arizona and Nevada, that's a 4 handle, as you heard. In California, it's way above. So, you know, I think a lot of folks are going to be seeing $4 a gallon, if not the whole country. You get the Midwest, down to Texas, the lower East Coast, maybe it'd be a little less. But, yeah, a lot of folks are going to be seeing $4.
Well, it raises the question as to why exactly this is happening. When prices had been coming down, now they're heading back up, potentially to these levels. Is this an issue of the economy is still doing much better than thought, so demand is staying strong, or is it an issue of supply, or is it both and, Bob?
I think it's mainly on the demand side with some geopolitical risk in there. As always, the most important determinant of what we pay at the pump is the price of global crude oil. And crude oil has been finding its footing here after selling off sharp late last year. Why? There's confidence in a soft landing. Macroeconomic factors have had a big influence on oil prices, crude oil. Folks are feeling better about a soft landing here. We even had some good Chinese data. And then we're starting to see the oil market tighten up. Inventories are drawing. Demand is good, even for gasoline in places like Europe. Demand is not bad. And so as those inventory draws show up, OPEC Plus has been extending its cuts. And now a little bit of geopolitical risk, not a lot, just a little bit with the Ukrainians hitting Russian refineries and the Red Sea. we're starting to see a solid base and a decent rally here. I don't expect it to go too much higher unless things get much worse in the Middle East, but we think oil has sort of found its footing, crude oil, and where crude oil goes, pump prices follow.
There were a lot of questions, Bob, following the bridge collapse this week in Baltimore about what impact that may or may not have on energy prices, knowing how much coal is coming out of that port. Do you have an answer to that question? Is this a factor or not?
It's a big deal for coal just because that's one of the biggest coal export ports we have. So that's the biggest
Does
energy
that bleed over
impact.
into oil prices?
No, not really. No, Baltimore, it gets its gasoline and diesel mainly from the Colonial Pipeline. It does import some asphalt into Baltimore, but they'll route that in through some other ports like Norfolk. So I think it's a local issue. Unfortunately, with that tragedy, it's not even a regional, much less a national issue we should worry about for oil prices.
Well, and if anything, the fact that there are so many containers trying to import and export out of Baltimore and all of the ports, for that matter, on the eastern seaboard may just underscore how intense global trade is and how much demand there still is for goods all around the world, which may just reinforce the higher prices as well, kind of being a signal of the more resilient economy that we are talking about. And of course, all of this does come back for us here in Washington to politics. We know that Biden has been plagued by high energy prices and prices at the pump. We talked about some of the things he tried to do to address that. What you hear on the other side of the aisle, including from his opponent in November, or presumed opponent, Donald Trump, is that American energy needs to be unleashed. And Bob, I believe we already were, at least in 2023, we'll see if it's the case again this year, pumping a record amount of oil here in the U.S. So when we are talking about American energy being unleashed, what exactly would that mean?
I think President Trump is talking about removing unnecessary or burdensome restrictions on developing new oil resources, new refining capacity, pipelines, and that type of thing, more with a long-term view. To your point, Kaylee, you're exactly right. Look, being a big producer doesn't mean you get to control the price at the pump. President Trump found that out. President Biden's finding that out. President Bush found that out. Big doesn't mean stable prices or comfortable prices, because the United States is basically a price taker in the global oil market, no matter how much oil we produce. The real, to paraphrase, I'm sorry, but Mao Zedong, power in the global oil market flows through the barrel of spare production capacity. And that's mainly in Saudi Arabia. That's wielded by OPEC+. They have more pricing power than the president, no matter how much we produce here. It's a tough truth for politicians to accept. You would think if we're a big producer, we ought to be able to keep gasoline at $3.20 forever. It doesn't work that way.
Bob, did we miss our opportunity to refill the SPR?
Yeah, I think we made a mistake in selling, especially that 180 million barrels. We sold way too much. To its credit, Joe, the administration has been putting oil back in. I think they realized that this thing is too low with all the mayhem we have in the world. And so they're putting in 3, 4 or so million a month. However, they said, look, if prices keep rising, we're going to stop filling the SPR. And I'm afraid that's a real chance here. So we should have avoided the sale. It's good that DOE is refilling. Be great if we refilled faster. But if prices start rising here, they'll probably stop, and that's understandable too. What would be a big mistake is to, again, use it as an election ploy and spill it again, to release another 60 or 90 million barrels just because gasoline prices approach your $4 handle. That would be just really unfortunate.
What about over the longer term, as you talk about the opportunity to fill up the SPR? What if we actually need it, not for price control, but for some kind of emergency? What kind of situation are we going to be in if it's drained to a large extent?
We're in trouble. We have drained our SPR to 40-year lows, and it will be costly to refill it anywhere close to the 600+ million barrels, much less the 700 million barrels where we got it to in the Bush administration. And as you mentioned, it's all about responding to a disruption. So if we get a few years down the road, demand doesn't peak, things are getting frothy, OPEC spare capacity goes down, and we have a conflict in the Arabian Gulf or somewhere else, we won't have that emergency buffer. That's why I think, again, I'll give them credit. To their credit, DOE is saying this thing is too low for a dangerous, volatile oil world. We need to refill it. But I'm afraid there's not political will on either side of the aisle, really, to refill it fast enough to give us that buffer later this decade. We'll miss it.
All right, we have to leave it on that note. But Bob McNally of Rapidan Energy, thank you so much, as always, for joining us on Bloomberg Television and Radio as we talk about energy, which certainly is a factor in this electoral cycle. Joe, it's something we hear a lot about from both sides, and we know, once again, prices at the pump do have an influence on voter sentiment, how they're feeling about the economy as they prepare to decide who they want to vote for president. But energy and the economy is on what is a long list of issues that may change the minds of voters.
Well, that's for sure. And then we see consumer sentiment today at the highest level since July, which you were smart to invoke earlier. Rick Davis, one of our political analysts who was on with us earlier this hour, always tells it's a more reliable poll than the polls. So even as oil prices increase, we're seeing sentiment on the rise as well. And I'm sure it's confounding some of the, the economic minds inside the White House.
Yeah, although maybe both of that is a sign of a more resilient economy than thought. People might be feeling better about the economy because they still have their jobs. Right. The economy is still growing. They can maybe afford the higher gas as their wages are rising. But definitely something of a puzzle. And we know that the economy is often top of mind, or at least up there on the list for voters. But we've found out throughout this primary cycle, and now that we're effectively in the general election, that immigration and the border sometimes is equal to or even above that issue in many of these states.
That's for sure. That's what our polling has brought to us. And as we learned on the ground in Iowa and New Hampshire, that was the case in both of those primaries. So it will certainly be near the top, if not the most important issue in the general election campaign. So not lost on us here. And that's why our bureau chief in Washington, Peggy Collins, made tracks to the border. Just returned recently from our southwest border in Texas. She's with us at the table now. Peggy, it's great to see you. This is going to be featured in our Big Take podcast, Big Take DC podcast, to be specific, that drops later today. I have no idea what's in store for us. What did you learn on your trip?
Well, it was a really impactful trip. As you were saying, Joe, we really wanted to go down to the border and talk to the people on multiple sides of the issue there, because it has become, other than the economy, one of the top two issues that voters are citing in terms of what matters most to them in this election in November. And one of the things that really stood out when we were there was how porous the border is, really. When you're there, you really see how close we are to Mexico, and that the river is really the border. It almost felt at some points like you could toss a baseball across and hit Mexico. One of the other things that really stood out is how much of a multi-pronged effort it is to try and deal with the crisis of so many people coming across the border from places in Latin America. I mean, I went up in a helicopter with some people to try and see like where they're seeing migrants crossing and how they're trying to deal with them on ranchers' land, for example. There's boats that are traversing back and forth. There's people who are waiting for the migrants to potentially touch ground on U.S. soil and then process them. There's nonprofits that are working with people who are coming across the border. There's city officials. There's religious people. It really is like a multi-pronged effort. And time again, we heard from people two key things. One, that it is a humanitarian crisis. And two, that small towns like Eagle Pass, Texas, where we were, really need help because they're small border towns and they're dealing with an incredible volume of people that are coming across.
Well, and it's worth pointing out that for that reason, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, has been really at the forefront of this issue, having the state of Texas do things that are legally in question now in regard to being able to detain people suspected of being having migrated over illegally. What sense did you get of the way that Texas is handling it and how much cooperation there really is at the federal level with what the state is doing?
So when we were there, actually, we went out with the Texas Department of Safety and we drove along the border. And when you're actually with them, we don't really sense a lot of tension between the feds and the state, right? But Texas has taken over this area right underneath a bridge that is a legitimate border crossing in Eagle Pass, Texas. It's Shelby Park, and basically there's a golf course there, and there's a bridge, and people traverse it every day from Mexico to the U.S., but also Texas, the state, has taken it over because they say they need more help and they need to get control over this. And it is difficult to see. I mean, there's a lot of concertina wire and razor wire, barbed wire up and down for miles in this Shelby Park area, but also up in some private lands. And we went to see some of the places where the migrants have been able to cross because there's an opening in the barbed wire. And there's just piles and piles and piles of clothes. When they cross the river, they take off their wet clothes and then they keep heading on. But there's diapers, there's toothbrushes, there's clothes, there's kids' backpacks, there's babies' booties. I mean, it's really human when you see it.
That's really something. As you bring this to life for us, you were at Eagle Pass, you said, the center of the standoff, as our Texas Bureau Chief Julie Fine refers to it. I think you guys were together on this trip.
We were.
You already answered part of my question. I was going to ask you if you could see the razor wire, if you could see the buoys and some of these other obstacles that have been put in place that have been considered very controversial from a place where an average citizen or a journalist could go. Was that all in your view?
We did see it. Yes, it is striking to see it. You look over at Mexico at points, and there's cows and horses and men fishing, and then you stand on the U.S. side, and you're looking right in the face of barbed wire.
Yeah.
But so many different people around those that we talked to, both law enforcement and people who were working with the migrants and the migrants themselves, did say that they're really trying to find a solution here because they understand how human it is.
It drops today. The Bloomberg Big Take DC podcast with the great help of Peggy Collins. Thanks, Peggy, for being with us.
This is Bloomberg.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Live on Bloomberg Radio and television, on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Carol Masser, along with Tim Stenivek. And we've got the bond market just closing ahead of the Good Friday holiday on this first quarter, because it's getting ready to wrap up as well when we talk about the trading quarter. The first quarter, which was quite a run-up when it comes to stocks.
Yeah, if things hold today, we'll see more than 10% on the S&P 500. The NASDAQ composite up 9%, while the Dow up 5.6% for the whole quarter.
All right, so get ready for tomorrow, everybody, because let's get to the setup at this hour on this Thursday, March 28th. Speaking of ends, as we said, talking about the end of the first quarter for trading, it's also the end of one crypto era, if you will, with the sentencing of Sam Bankman-Fried, 25 years. We're going to dig into that pretty deeply.
Plus, the Amazon AI playbook spending billions of dollars on AI, not just in the startup Anthropic, but also on data centers.
And real estate, we talk about a lot. We're concerned about office properties. We're going to get into where the real stress is, at least according to one of the heads of real estate investing over at Morgan Stanley Investment Management. And then, one more thing.
Yeah, how does this sound? Traders betting on the psychedelic renaissance. We're going to tell you what that's all about.
All right, looking forward to that story. First up, though, let's get a check on the trading day. He may have some thoughts, but he's going to hold them to himself. Here's John Tucker.
No comment from me. Anyway, what? We closed at a record for the S&P 500. You were keeping count. I don't remember what it was.
22? What?
Something like that.
It's more than 20.
Yeah,
More than 20. So if we keep up today, only 2 points higher on the S&P 500. That's good enough if we keep that up for yet another record, 5250 on the index. Some news crossing about Apple. Apple's overseas suppliers ramping up production of the company's long-anticipated new iPads, a launch planned for early May. This, according to people with knowledge of the matter. The move marks an end to the longest stretch without new models in the history of the iPad, which was actually introduced by Apple co-founder Steve Jobs back in 2010. Equity traders in something of a holding pattern ahead of the important inflation data tomorrow. The bond market that closes at 2 Wall Street time today, ahead of the long holiday weekend for the street. And after yesterday's record close again for the S&P 500, 7 of the 11 major industry groups in the index higher right now. Energy, real estate are in the lead. Communication services, information technology, they are the big drags. The S&P 500, again, 2 points higher, 5251 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average of 28 points at 39,787. And the NASDAQ Composite Index is 30 points lower. That's down 0.2%. Quick look at Treasuries, the more policy-reactive 2-year yield. Remember Jay Powell, he's speaking tomorrow along with the PCE. That's up 5 basis points right now at 462. The 10-year yield up 1 basis point. That is at 420. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
John Tucker, it would be the 22nd record, if indeed. S&P 500.
That's why we love you, Carol.
Yeah, well, you know.
One of the many reasons.
I got a Bloomberg in front of me. I can do this stuff. All right, guys, let's move on. We're going to get back to John a little bit later on. So once crypto king, once golden boy of crypto, once a modern-day J.P. Morgan, that one-time billionaire, Tim, and FTX co-founder Sam Bankman-Fried, as you know by now, sentenced to 25 years in prison for stealing billions of dollars from customers, marking the final chapter in a case that has both captivated and overshadowed the crypto industry.
With more on today's sentencing in the era of crypto and finance failure and fraud that the now 32-year-old SBF was behind, we welcome into the Bloomberg studio Bloomberg News legal analyst June Grasso. She's also host of Bloomberg Law, weeknights at 6 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio, along with Zeke Fox, Bloomberg News financial investigations reporter, also the author of Number Go Up, Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall. Zeke joining us on the phone from New York City because Zeke traveling after being in the courtroom this morning. Now, that's where we want to start, Zeke. What was it like in the courtroom earlier today when Sam Bankman-Fried was sentenced and also ahead of that sentencing?
So it was packed as usual with reporters. And when Sam walked in, he was wearing his prison jumpsuit instead of a suit like during the trial, as is, legal procedure. And he took the opportunity to address the judge like he did during his case. And I was watching to see if he would just apologize and take responsibility for what happened. For a minute, it sort of looked like he might, but then he fell back on his the story that he's been saying since FTX failed, which is that mistakes were made, the buck stops with me, but he's not admitting to stealing customer money.
All right, so I want to bring in June Grosso. June, so I am curious, that 25-year sentence, how much did the judge, potentially, Judge Kaplan, use that, you know, that even in the 11th hour, Sam Bankman-Fried didn't come out and said, I committed a crime. How did that factor into the sentencing? Because it could have been much worse. It could have been a lot less, potentially.
Yeah. So even before the sentencing, Judge Kaplan had increased the guidelines range for Bankman-Fried after finding that he had perjured himself at his trial. And what he said at the sentencing was, when he wasn't outright lying, he was evasive, hair-splitting, dodging questions, and, quote, I've never seen a performance quite like that. He took that into account, and I think that, you know, that weighed against Sam Bankman-Fried. He also took into account, you know, as Zeke said, he didn't think that he was sorry for what he had done. He said he expressed sympathy, expressed sorrow, but it wasn't real to him. And you know, also he had, before the sentencing, expanded the guidelines too, and he found that Sam Bankman-Fried had tampered with a witness. If you remember, before trial, Sam was out on bail, and the judge called him back to New York and abruptly threw him into prison despite the bail because he said he had been tampering with a witness. So, I mean, the judge had been through this whole trial watching Sam Bankman-Fried, and, you know, this is a very tough sentence. If you think about, though it is in line with some of the big kind of white-collar crime we've seen, for example, Jeff Skilling at Enron, I think he was sentenced to 24 years, and Bernie Ebbers, 25 years. So it is in line with that, but you think about state crimes, if you commit a murder in state, basically, you know, you'll be out in 15 years or so. So they're making this the white collar crime into what you
Bernie
consider
Madoff
more,
got 150 years.
Yeah, Bernie Madoff, that is held up as the most extreme example of how many years of defrauding people. So I think it is a tough sentence.
Hey, Zeke, come on back in here and give us an idea of what Sam Bankman-Fried was like when he found out that he got 25 years, if you saw any reaction from his parents who were in the courtroom, because his mom did write a lengthy letter to the judge in recent weeks about being lenient in the sentencing. Yeah,
Sam was standing there, his hands folded. He was pretty impassive. It was hard to know what he was thinking. His parents also did not make a big dramatic reaction. I mean, his mom, yeah, she had written a pretty moving letter about what Sam was like as a child, how he was different from other kids, how he wasn't motivated by the same things as them, and how his commitment to making the world a better place was real. And the defense talked about that too when his new lawyer gave a speech. But and the defense said in kind of a good one-liner, he wasn't a monster, he was a math nerd. And you know, if this was all the information you had, you know, it might be kind of convincing. But the problem was that this totally didn't address the fact that during the trial, his 4 best friends and top lieutenants at FTX in a row each took the stand and said, hey, no, we committed a giant fraud on purpose. We knew it was wrong. We did it anyway. Sam directed us to do it. And they presented a lot of evidence that showed that. So whether Sam was a nerd or whether he was actually greedy was kind of beside the point. It's like this fraud still occurred.
Hey, Zeke,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, Zeke, I said you bring up a really good point. We're talking about Caroline Ellison, Nishad Singh, and Gary Wong. Right now, they're awaiting their own fate after helping seal their former boss's conviction for pulling off a multi-billion-dollar fraud involving tens of thousands of customers. June, I have this question, and I don't know to what extent you can answer it because we're kind of playing, you know, shoulda, woulda, coulda here.
Yeah.
But the 3 individuals I just mentioned, they all pleaded guilty and cooperated. What if Sam Bankman-Fried had pleaded guilty and cooperated with law enforcement
So
what would he be facing right now?
as I understand, and Zeke may know better, as I understand, the prosecutors never offered him a deal. There weren't deal negotiations. So that's my understanding, that he wasn't offered a deal, that they got those three, and the case against him then just built.
Zeke, was that the case?
That's true. And you have to imagine he would have gotten a lighter sentence if he just threw himself in the mercy of the court. But I have another interesting counterfactual. What if all of those people got together and decided, hey, let's stick to a different story. Let's say it was, let's not admit to fraud. Let's all say we're not guilty. Could the government have enough evidence from documents and otherwise to convict them? They definitely had some evidence, but it would have been a lot harder. All of their text messages were set to auto-delete, so the government didn't have a lot of contemporary records of them, agreeing to commit some of the key acts.
Someone always flips, though. Someone always flips, because you have 3 people, 4 people, and someone is going to feel nervous about it. And the prosecutors, they ask them questions, they bring them in with their lawyers. And, it's very hard to imagine that all 4 of them would have kept to a story. So I think one of them would have flipped somewhere along the way.
Zeke, let me ask you, the lawyers, said that they expect to recover more money, or enough money, to pay back everyone in full in terms of FTX investors. So having said that, I don't know, does it speak to that, they actually kind of figured out some things and did it well in the crypto space? Like, how do you read that, interpret that?
Yeah. So it is pretty wild that when FTX failed, there was $8 billion missing. And now the lawyers running the bankrupt company are like, we've recovered enough money that we think we'll be able to pay all of that back to the customers. And the reason, though, is not that the money was never stolen. It's that a lot of it comes from this huge run-up in crypto prices. Basically, when FTX failed, in Alameda, they still had some crypto, and it wasn't stuff they thought they could sell quickly enough to satisfy all the customer demand, hence the bankruptcy. But now they've had more time, and the price of one of these tokens in particular, Solana, is up like tenfold. And if the bankruptcy estate is able to sell it all while the market is hot, they'll make like $10 billion. It's crazy. So that's essentially, it's not that the customer money wasn't misappropriated, it's that he did make some good gambles with it, it looks like, or with the help of these bankruptcy lawyers.
Zeke, you literally... The judge didn't believe that, by the way.
Go ahead. Yeah, talk about that, June, because that was an interesting moment today.
Because that was also what was in the defense papers. Hey, there's not really a loss here. They're going to be paid back. And the judge said, the defendant's assurance that they'll be paid in full is misleading. It is logically flawed. It is speculative. The judge, basically everything that they threw at him, the defense, including that Sam Bankman-Fried is autistic, he twisted it around and used it against Sam Bankman-Fried. So they said he's autistic. And he said, well, he is autistic, but that gives him a great capacity to do things.
Judge Kaplan worried about what he might do next?
Yeah, that's chilling to me. And I just was reading it. He said, because the defense was arguing, he's young, he has an opportunity to do so many things. They tried to compare him to Michael Milken and what could happen if he comes out, charitable work. And the judge said, no, he just wanted power. He was power hungry. And he said, there's a risk that this man will be in a position to do something very bad in the future. It's not a trivial risk. And I was shocked by that.
It's interesting, right?
Well, I want to talk to Zeke about that, because Zeke, before the downfall of Sam Bankman-Fried, before the fall of FTX, you spent some time one-on-one with SBF. You got to know him a little bit for a pretty big story in Business Week that you recently recounted in the Big Take podcast. Talk a little bit about what he's... Maybe it was the Spellcaster podcast, excuse me. It was in one of the great podcasts that our team has done.
Tim listens to a lot of podcasts. That's the message.
A lot of podcasts with Zeke. Talk a little bit about what his personality was like and what really shocked you about this guy.
So, some people after FTX failed have taken this to mean that everything about Sam was a lie, and I actually don't think that that's true. When I met him, what really made him seem different and interesting was that this was a guy who, he told me this story about how when he was a teenager, he met a philosopher who convinced him that the best way to help the world would be to get really rich and give all the money away. I'm meeting him. It's like 9 years later, and he's worth $20 billion. And I actually think from like all my time getting to know him and talking to people in his circles, this part of the story is really true. Mm-hmm. And that actually is what it made him dangerous, because when he was presented with the chance to either, he could justify anything that he wanted to do by saying, hey, there's like a real chance that if we're successful, we might do something that could change world history. So what's a little fraud here and there? Like, we might literally save millions of lives if we get rich enough and make trillions of dollars. And he's a guy who thought about the odds all the time. He was somebody who weighed the odds. Like, what are the odds I'm going to get caught? What are the odds if I'm successful? I mean, to be fair, this is my take. Now, he did not admit to this and say sorry today, but I think that's why they're saying he's dangerous, because if he has another chance to, his philosophy, in my opinion, would justify trying again.
The means justify the end is basically what it is. Hey, June, I want to ask you, this was a punitive sentencing. This was about sending a message. Is it clear that Judge Kaplan did just that when it comes to, I don't know, not just crypto, but finance fraud?
I think that was part of what this was all about. And he said that this is about, stopping people from doing this in the future. And afterwards, the Manhattan U.S. Attorney, Damian Williams, put out a statement. And he also said that this is a way of warning people about this. So that's part of the sentence, because this is such a high-profile case. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, for example, Mark Mukasey got Trevor Milton 4 years instead of 11. That case was high profile, but not like this. This was crazy. So I think that the judge felt that he had to send a message.
Is there appeal? Can this be reduced real quickly?
Well, there is going to be an appeal. He says they're going to appeal the conviction and the sentence. Mm-hmm. But appeals are very difficult in cases like this. So, and he has a new team. He has a great team. But so we'll see what happens with that. And the judge also asked that he be put in a low security prison because of his autism, and that it might be difficult for him in a regular prison. Although he seems to be getting along okay at Brooklyn Correction.
Well, a fascinating, I guess, final chapter, perhaps.
No appeal yet.
Well, that's right. Okay, so not quite a final chapter. To both of you, thank you so much. Really bringing a lot of clarity and analysis to this story. Bloomberg News legal analyst June Grosso, host of Bloomberg Law, weeknights at 6 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio, so catch that. And Zeke Fox, immeasurable in terms of his insight, too, on the world of crypto. Bloomberg News financial investigations reporter. Check out his book, Number Go Up, Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall. Coming up next, Amazon spending mega bucks on the AI craze.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with his Bloomberg Business Flash. S&P 500 right now, little change before some key inflation data. We're going to get that tomorrow. And the Federal Reserve Governor, Christopher Waller, said he wants to see at least a couple of months of better inflation data before cutting interest rates. Tomorrow, market holiday, we get the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, the core PCE. And add to that the fact that Fed Chair Jerome Powell speaking tomorrow. You get a reason to maybe stay on the sidelines for now. Apple suppliers ramping up production of the company's long-anticipated new iPads, a launch planned for early May. And Senator Bernie Sanders wants to meet next week with Novo Nordisk top executive about lowering the price of its blockbuster drug Ozempic. Sanders considering hearings on the cost of GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic. Right now, the S&P 500 5 points higher. That's up 0.1%. 52.53 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 27 points. The Nasdaq Composite Index 17 points lower. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
And John, what record would that be on the S&P 500?
Actually, I forget.
22nd.
22nd, 22.
Yesterday was the 21st.
Just a record.
That's why it's a team effort here. Go team. All right, John Tucker, we'll come back in a little bit. Hey, folks, we are clearly seeing Amazon's playbook when it comes to artificial intelligence. That playbook includes some news today, Tim, and quite a spending spree.
Okay, let's talk about some serious money here. Amazon planning to spend close to $150 billion over the coming 15 years on data centers. So it gives the cloud computing giant the firepower to handle an expected explosion in demand for AI applications and other digital services. Carol, that's not all.
No.
We got the news yesterday that the startup Anthropic, it's an AI startup, Amazon investing an additional $2.75 billion into the company. So now Amazon is all in on the company at about $4 billion.
All right, let's get a roundup on all things Amazon on this Thursday. We head to our Seattle bureau. That's where we find Bloomberg News technology reporter Matt Day. Hey, Matt, good to have you here with Tim and me. Feels like a pretty aggressive play by Amazon, spending a lot on the data center side. We know they've already spent a lot on the data center side. Give us some context and the particulars on what could be, nearly $150 billion.
Yeah, that's right. Data centers used to be something that basically every company did. You know, they either ran their own, they leased a little bit of space, they used what's called a co-location facility, and sometimes just bought a rack inside a broader facility. That whole world is getting consolidated, right? The cloud computing explosion of the last 10 years means that increasingly it's Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Meta to some extent that are the real big spenders in this market. And Amazon, you know, sort of as a show of force in the last year or two has been, you know, just telling us how much they're going to spend on each complex of data centers, and it adds up to a lot of money.
Well, it does add up to a lot of money, especially the $150 billion in the coming 15 years on data centers. But I'm curious, in your opinion, Matt, based on your reporting, which one of these represents sort of a bigger bet for Amazon? Because there are different types of investments. $4 billion on this startup Anthropic, and then $150 billion on data centers. They're not mutually exclusive by any means, but talk to us about which one you think is sort of the bigger bet.
That's a great question. I mean, probably the bigger bet is on Anthropic, right? Like the data center demand or the data center forecast that they're laying out, a lot of that's predicated on, you know, just the usual corporate technology work that they're doing, right? More corporate databases, you know, more file storage, more streaming video for their clients like Netflix. That's a lot of sort of regular IT spending. The bet that they have with Anthropic is a little bit more looking around the corner. You know, $4 billion into that startup, really cozying up to them and trying to associate that Anthropic brand, which builds a really well-regarded ChatGPT rival, with Amazon, right? The play there is, you know, in the long term, Amazon's hoping that when people want to do generative AI, this and that, they'll turn to Amazon to run the infrastructure.
What is Anthropic? Remind us what that company is all about.
Yeah, so if OpenAI and ChatGPT, the input string of conversational text, like a conversation we're having now, and you get results and you get data analysis, you can have it write a poem for you. Anthropic does similar work. They've got a chatbot franchise called Claude that is really highly regarded, right? If companies aren't using ChatGPT, a lot of them are using Claude. It's able to parse through vast quantities of data, come up with analysis, generate text that really looks like it might have been generated by a person in some cases.
You know, it's interesting, right? We talk about this, and you know this so well, Matt, right? When it comes to some of these big tech companies, they tend to sometimes work together, or they're working with a company that is working with another big tech company. So you've got Anthropic agreeing to use Amazon Web Services data centers to power some of its operations, and also use some of Amazon's custom-built computer chips. Anthropic also is committed to using chips from Alphabet's Google, so they're another close partner. It's like all in the family. But it is interesting how everybody is jockeying when it comes to AI at this point. Safe to say, these bets, I mean, who knows ultimately how it all plays out?
Yeah, and this is one of the more interesting power struggles going on in Silicon Valley right now is, who's got the inside track with hot startups like OpenAI. Obviously, that's a big Microsoft investment, and they've kind of staked out that ground. Anthropic, to your point, they've been invested in by both Google and Amazon. They're using chips and other hardware from both of those companies. It's if companies don't have their own generative AI story to tell, they at least want to be partnering with someone who does, and I think that's definitely the case with the tug-of-war over Anthropic.
Okay, not totally unrelated, back to data centers, because you need data centers for these AI applications, Matt. Investing in and building a data center, not so easy anymore. Communities around the country don't necessarily always welcome them with open arms. They use a lot of electricity, they use a lot of resources, they don't necessarily employ a lot of people. Talk to us about what companies now have to go through in order to build these.
Yeah, it just takes a lot longer than it used to. I mean, there was a time when, broadly demand for electricity in the U.S. was flat. With the explosion in internet use and kind of forecasts for AI to only make data centers a prized commodity even more, it's just hard to get these things connected to the grid. Data Center Alley in Virginia, which is the largest cluster of these things in the United States, there the utility a couple of years ago had to turn off connections to new data centers for a few months just because they couldn't meet the demand. So this is something that companies have to look around corners a little bit more than they would have 5 or 10 years ago. And I think that's a large part of the reason why Amazon is investing well in advance and touting the sums that it's going to be spending, because they see this opposition too. They don't want to get voted down at a zoning board or a county commission. They want to say, listen, this is $5 billion on the table. You don't want to kill that golden goose.
How much to Matt is related to, maybe we did see web services slowing down last year, but give us some context in terms of what we're seeing in 2024 and how this is just Amazon making sure that when it comes to another demand vertical, if you will, that they want to make sure that they are there and on it.
Yeah, a lot of this is they're playing defense. Their Amazon Web Services growth slowed to a record low last year. Their chief rivals, Microsoft and Google, are growing much quicker. And so what Amazon wants to do here is stake out, a claim and say, listen, we can power, the broadest range of services. We have, the broadest set of hardware behind our server farms. So we can make guarantees to companies that their rivals can't, right? That's a large part of what they're trying to do here, is just stake out this lead in this market that they invented and kind of fend off some faster growing rivals.
Is that what they say their competitive advantage is when they're trying to sell a client or a potential client, or keep a current client from going to a competitor? Like, what can they offer that other, is this a commodity at this point, Matt? I guess that's my question.
A lot of it is, like, if we're talking basic, I need to turn on a website and I need to store the images somewhere, that is very much a commodity service. You're going to get similar quality stuff whether you go to any of the big three cloud companies. So Amazon has really emphasized that, listen, we've got the best redundancy in the industry, the most data centers, the broadest set of services. They've kind of had to extend their pitch as some of that, really basic technological infrastructure that is no longer novel if, you're using it in your own back room behind me, or if you're using it from a cloud computing data center.
Amazon's always an interesting company. It's like one of those companies, and you know it too, Matt, right? I feel like it's true with Tesla. I almost feel like with Apple, right, Tim? Like Amazon, there's stories every day, it feels like, or almost every day. While we have you, I just got to ask you about them expanding same-day prescription drug delivery to New York City and I think Los Angeles. That was earlier this week. What do we know about that? And what are kind of the prime focal points for Amazon right now? A giant, so much a part of all of our lives. But where are they really kind of making sure that they are aggressive players in future growth?
Yeah, healthcare is a long, slow-burning bet for them. You go way back to 2018, they acquired PillPack, a pretty well-regarded mail-order pharmacy. This is the extension of that work, right? Taking that pharmacy franchise national, speeding up delivery times where they can. Kind of behind the scenes, they've been striking partnerships with big insurers so that, if you want to get, I believe it's Blue Cross in California and Florida, you want to get stuff delivered, prescriptions delivered, Amazon is your default mail-order option, right? So as they've conquered, for lack of a better word, though they'd still argue they have plenty to go in online retail. Healthcare has emerged as one of the key markets for them to just scrape for growth. They'll also offer you a primary care doctor too with One Medical, which they snapped up a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Very,
Continuing, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking at a story, Zepbound in short supply at Amazon, Rite Aid, and pharmacies. I mean, like, just a reminder of how many different areas of our lives that they're a part of.
So it raises a
Amazon
question,
is.
Matt, when it comes to antitrust and when it comes to regulators. What's the most important sector for us, for our investing audience to watch for potential additional regulatory action?
That's a great question. The cloud is probably a good one. The cloud hasn't come up a ton in the FTC's case against Amazon, which is primarily focused on Amazon's behavior as a retailer. But regulators in the U.S. and in Europe have poked around the big cloud computing companies, asking questions like, to what extent are clouds making it harder to switch between services? Are there predatory terms perhaps? That's Amazon Web Services is definitely one to watch there too.
All right, guys, just looking at Amazon shares, they're just down, just up slightly, up about 0.25%. But if I take a look at what they've been doing this year, they're up, Tim, almost 19% here in 2024. So
I went to look up Amazon and I typed in AWS, which I think tells you how
What
I
would
think
Freud
of
say about that?
associating Amazon. I mean, it certainly still is the profit engine of the company, no question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Matt Day, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Bloomberg News technology reporter Matt Day. Hey, coming up next, we're going to get into the real stress when it comes to real estate.
What is it?
Well, I'm not going to tell you.
Do you know it?
Otherwise, you might not stick around.
Hey, speaking of sticking around, we got about a little less than 90 minutes until the close of equity trading. The bond market is closed. The Dow and the S&P 500 are higher, while the Nasdaq Composite down slightly.
One more hint. We're going to talk with Lauren Hochfelder. She's co-CEO of Real Estate Investing at Morgan Stanley Investment Management. So we'll see what she has to say specifically about that. All right, folks, a lot going on. As we said, we'll check in on the real estate trade, see what she might have to say about Amazon's investing billions and billions of dollars when it comes to data centers, specifically for AI. In the meantime, let's get a check on world and national news.
Yeah, we got Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 991 newsroom in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. Crypto whiz Sam Bankman-Fried says he's sorry for what happened at every stage of the FTX collapse. And during a plea for leniency from his sentencing judge today, he also said he was haunted every day for making a series of bad decisions. In the end, the judge sentenced Bankman-Fried to 25 years in prison for defrauding investors and using their money to cover his lavish spending. Donald Trump is seeking to have his Georgia election interference case dismissed on First Amendment grounds. Trump's lead attorney, Steve Sadow, told the judge today why he believes the indictment should be thrown out.
Speech, expressive conduct that deals with campaigning or elections has always been found to be at the zenith of protected speech. What do we have here? We have election speech. So one must determine immediately whether that constitutes core political speech, and I suggest that it does.
Prosecutors say it's premature to rule on the nature or intent of Trump's speech ahead of the trial. The funeral for former Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman will be held in his hometown of Stamford tomorrow. The giant in Connecticut politics died yesterday after complications from a fall. He was 82. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with his Bloomberg Business Flash. S&P 500 currently sitting up pretty with a 10% gain the first quarter of the year. Yeah, it's at the end of the quarter. After yesterday's record close, higher right now, not by much, just a few points, but still on track for another record if this keeps up through the close. Best performing stock in the S&P 500, that belongs to Estee Lauder. It was up over 6%. Bank of America upgrading the personal care products maker to buy from neutral. They say the company's earnings have now bottomed out. Apple, overseas suppliers ramping up production of the company's long-anticipated new iPads. Haven't had one of those for a while. Launch is now planned for early May. And mortgage rates in the U.S. declining, helping to ease affordability challenges for home buyers. The average for a 30-year fixed loan, 6.79%. I kiss my
Below
mortgage.
7. Oh, I bet you do.
I kiss my mortgage every night before I go to bed. Bye. S&P 500. Yeah, I'm weird.
TMI, buddy.
Up 4 points. The Dow up 14. The Nasdaq Composite Index 21 points lower. We check the markets for you all day long.
Does your mortgage kiss you back?
That's between me and my mortgage.
Okay. I think we're getting into territory that I'm a little uncomfortable over. Okay? I'm just going to say. All right.
I told you my tolls are higher than my mortgage right now.
Which is nuts.
That is nuts.
That's kind of a Bloomberg story. That would be a most read story in the Bloomberg. My tolls are higher than my mortgage.
Just wait till congestion pricing.
Are you trying to get me in trouble again, aren't you?
Don't rile him. Don't rile him. He won't be kissing his mortgage anymore. All right, everybody. John Tucker, thank you so much. We just talked with Bloomberg's Matt Day about Amazon's plan to spend almost $150 billion over, I think, 15 years on data centers needed for the AI boom. Data centers, Tim, we know one of the real estate investment plays we've heard a lot about for years. More recently, the focus and concern when it comes to commercial real estate has been on offices, as working from home, as we know, still sticks for many post-pandemic, Tim.
Yeah, the Bloomberg REIT Office Property Index down about 2% so far this year. It lost 3% in 2023, but Carol, dropped close to 40% back in 2022.
All right, with a look at the commercial real estate space, we welcome Lauren Huckfelder. She's co-CEO of real estate investing over at Morgan Stanley Investment Management. She joins us right here in New York City. Lauren, welcome to Bloomberg. Hey, commercial real estate, we know location, 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 but it also can be divided into a lot of different buckets. You've got office, retail, you've got data centers, you've got industrial. Walk us through the different sectors. Where are you seeing strength and where's the continued weakness, like perhaps office?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And I would say it's funny you use the old expression, location, location, location. That is absolutely paramount in real estate. But, you know, today we talk about dislocation, dislocation, dislocation. We have to look at what's changing, what's being disrupted, and invest accordingly. So yes, take office, take U.S. commodity office in particular, and it is absolutely being disrupted. You have a dramatic demand destruction. We all know that people tried out working from home in the pandemic and decided it wasn't so bad. So we're seeing a dramatic demand destruction. But frankly, also those assets just don't meet modern tenant demands. They don't meet them from a standpoint of quality or amenitization. Frankly, they don't meet their carbon reduction goals. So these are assets that many of which will be stranded because they simply don't have long-term cash flow growth potential. But go to the opposite.
Wait. Can I jump in there, though? So U.S. commodity office, you're saying it's going to be stranded. So what happens and what are the financial implications, whether it's to the owners of those properties, to the banks who hold the loans on those properties? How does that play out? And then how does that maybe make more valuable some of the higher tier office property?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. Well, I'll start with the end. So you're seeing a massive consolidation of demand into the best of the best assets. So perhaps counterintuitively, the destruction of demand for more commodity space is actually driving increased demand for the best of the best. I'll give you an example. Take San Francisco. San Francisco office is one of the worst markets globally. And I can tell you, even in San Francisco, we own some of the best office assets in that market. Even today, we're signing leases at rents above pre-COVID levels. So to your point, it speaks to the benefits to the best.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those benefits or what that offers potential tenants. I mean, What exactly in 2024, in this world of hybrid work that we live in, a world where AI companies are just flourishing in the Bay Area and bringing people back to the city, what is an office building, what does an office building need to provide to attract and retain tenants right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's amenities, it's a focus on wellness, it is all of the bones, if you will, so big open ceiling heights, big open windows, but ultimately it comes down to, I think, amenitization, wellness, and of course, location.
So can buildings that don't offer those things right now, can they be converted at a reasonable cost to buildings that will soon become attractive?
There's a lot of talk about converting old office buildings into other uses, converting it into residential, converting it into life science or lab space. And the reality is some assets will be converted. We've seen success stories, for example, here in New York after September 11th, a lot of office buildings in lower Manhattan were converted to residential buildings, but two things were different. One, many of those office buildings had smaller floor plates, so physical structures that were more conducive to conversion. And two, frankly, there was government subsidy for that. And I think that the math is simply, even for those assets that have the right physical footprint, the math is very challenging when you get to overhauling the mechanical systems, everything going up and down the building.
Hey, one thing I wanted to ask you, obviously front and center here, coming off the unfortunate bridge collapse in Baltimore, and we are once again talking about supply chains, and that is certainly an investment trend that you guys are seeing. You call it a second mega trend, tailwind driving demand in the industrial real estate space, and it has to do with the global supply chain. Talk to us about that, and you guys are investing this way?
Absolutely. So I would say in contrast to office, we love industrial real estate. We love it on a global basis, and it's really for two reasons. The first is e-commerce. So that's very much been the story of the last decade. So we, as all of us started buying an increasing share of our goods online versus in-store, and frankly demanding it get to us faster and faster, we started buying in buildings those warehouses that get goods to our front doors every day. And as e-commerce penetration went, grew by 2.5x, so too did rents. So that's been a great tailwind for U.S. industrial real estate, for global industrial real estate, and I think that will continue, albeit decelerate. The second mega trend, and it's really at the earlier innings, so even more exciting, is the overhaul in the global supply chain. Look, we're coming off decades of a super smooth, super efficient global supply chain. We've all enjoyed the disinflationary benefits of that supply chain, but now things are changing. You look at what happened tragically in Baltimore this week, but I think it's really, it goes well beyond that. Among the many things that COVID laid bare was the fragility of the global supply chain, and we live it daily now. It is event-driven supply shocks, so COVID certainly being an enormous one, but you also have what's going on in the Panama Canal or labor disputes at the port, so event-driven supply shocks. And frankly, you have the overlay of geopolitics or deglobalization.
Hey, Lauren, we only have 30 seconds left, but I do want to talk politics, not geopolitics. How do investors in this space need to follow the presidential election? Do things change for you if Biden loses and Trump wins?
Just got about 20 seconds.
Look, politics affects everything, but ultimately we are focused around big mega trends that are durable demand drivers, regardless of who's in office.
All right, interesting stuff. And certainly it feels like this is going to be continuing a chapter in the real estate space. And in general, kind of we talk about in terms of how office plays its way out and then just kind of where investors are going. Hey, Lauren, thank you so much. Lauren Hochfelder, co-CEO of Real Estate Investing at Morgan Stanley Investment Management, joining us in New York City.
Hey, coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about how LSD and ecstasy are luring traders betting on a psychedelic renaissance. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker in the newsroom. Some of the companies we're looking at today, companies manufacturing meat made with cultured animal cells. They're actually under attack by red state legislatures backed by powerful agriculture groups. Two companies have clearance to sell cultivated chicken in the U.S. The two are Good Meat and Upside Foods. But GOP lawmakers in Alabama, Arizona, Florida, and Tennessee, among those advancing measures to ban cultivated meat and penalize those who manufacture, distribute, or serve it. The debate pitting the nascent industry backed by venture capitalists against lawmakers who paint the product as too new to trust and incomparable to the meat raised by farmers and ranchers, a lot of their constituents. Well, Florida could be the first state to prohibit cultivated meat. And trading options tied to former President Donald Trump's media company attracting meme stock traders and Wall Street professionals. Add to that list the bond king, Bill Gross, the eye-popping cost to flip derivatives, betting on Trump Media and Technology Group, given expectations for more wild swings. It was called about Gross in a post on X that he did. He writes, a genius can also be an investor with the courage to sell DJT options at 250 annualized volatility, he wrote. Gross likes the idea so much he's trading it himself. And FTX co-founder Sam Bankman-Fried, we've been telling you about that, sentenced to 25 years, shorter than the 40 to 50 prosecutors had recommended. The decision sets the tone for others accused of crimes involving digital assets. They include former Celsius Network Chief Executive Officer Alois Mrsinski. And that is your company news. I'm John Tucker.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stennebeck on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. For that, we go to Nancy Lyons, who's in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. Disgraced crypto boss Sam Bankman-Fried has been sentenced to 25 years for stealing billions from FTX customers. Prosecutors had sought 40 to 50 years. His lawyers wanted 6.5. Loyola law professor Laurie Levinson.
Even though the prosecution had asked for 50 years, 25 years is a significant sentence and in line with other high-profile white-collar criminals.
Loyola's Laurie Levinson, the 32-year-old Bankman-Fried, was convicted last fall of stealing massive amounts of deposits before FTX collapsed and then using the crypto to make investments, buy property, and to donate to political candidates. President Biden tonight is hosting what is being described as the most successful fundraiser in American history. He's expected to raise $25 million for his re-election campaign at the New York event that's being held at Radio City Music Hall. Presidents Clinton and Obama will be there, which Biden's press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says is significant.
These are presidents, two former president, the current president, that believe in what we're trying to do in the Biden-Harris administration, trying to move this country forward, trying to make sure we're protecting our democracy, protecting our freedom, building an economy that leaves no one behind.
The highest paid donors at the event will have access to perks like a photo with the three presidents taken by legendary photographer Annie Leibovitz. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Carol and Tim.
All right, Nancy Lyons, thank you so much. All right, folks, now to our one more thing, and this story definitely caught our attention on this Thursday. For years, investors poured money into psychedelic stocks. They've wagered for their breakout moment. Eye-watering returns that would quickly follow. All of this stuff were just around the corner. This is what they were waiting for, and year after year, it's been, by and large, pretty much a losing bet, but it seems like this year, Tim, things are changing.
Yeah, well, investors once again piling into these stocks. We're talking about companies like Mind Medicine, also known as MindMed. Those shares have more than doubled this year. GH Research's stock price has surged by roughly 85%. And then you have Atai Life Sciences has climbed more than 25%. The big question a lot of folks has is this going to be another false dawn for these type of companies? Is it compared to what happened with pot stocks over the past few years, Carol, where a lot of people put a lot of money in and performance has not been very good, despite the fact that it seems like legislation is just around the corner here in the U.S.?
Well, here's what I'm going to say. One example, MindMed's LSD-based treatment for anxiety just became the third drug in the psychedelic space to secure a so-called breakthrough designation from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So that status basically means it should expedite development. So this August, the agency expected to announce a landmark decision on what could be the first FDA-approved psychedelic therapy, a treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder based on MDMA, better known as ecstasy. So it's not just a case of investors kind of interested, but you're noticing regulators take note.
It doesn't, though. It doesn't mean that FDA approval is guaranteed at this point.
Good point.
And we have noticed that psychedelics have long struggled to get regulatory acceptance. Industry watchers say monetizing hallucinogens will actually present its own challenges too.
Yeah, looking at all of them, they range. Atai is about $335 million in market cap. GH Research about $500 million, and then you've got Mind Medicine about $680 million. And I'm looking, short positions kind of vary on them, so it's not like they're overshorted at this point. But anyway, one more thing.
What do you think?
I think there are some medical uses where that might be really helpful with people who've had some really traumatic disorders or post-traumatic disorders.
We'll see if the approval comes.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, folks, for those of you watching on TV, coming up next is The Close. For those listening, Bloomberg Business Week, Tim and I continue, including Big Day tomorrow for Jay Powell and some economic news.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, Bloomberg Business Week continuing on this Thursday, March 28th. Carol Masser along with Tim Stenivek. We're just 1 hour away from the closing bell, getting ready to wrap up what has been a very bullish first quarter for stocks. And Tim, I'm looking at my Bloomberg and the S&P Dow, NASDAQ 100 with just about, an hour to go, 60 minutes to go. And we're seeing some buying here in the last few minutes or so.
Yes, that gets us year to date to 10.31 on the S&P 500, up 0.3% right now.
If we close at this level,
22nd record close this year.
Yeah, a lot of records this year on the S&P. Just in case John Tucker's listening.
How many?
Just
22, John
22.
Tucker.
So,
22.
John, count my fingers. Boom.
I think
boom,
today's going to be 23.
Hey, as you mentioned, big day tomorrow
Yes.
because of that key inflation report. Also, we're going to get a take on the U.S. Justice Department's case against Apple.
David Rubenstein's going to be along. You know him, of course, of Carlisle and his show here on Bloomberg. He's going to talk about the bridge collapse. He was born in Baltimore, and also on some news that's been a long time in coming.
We also got a double dose, or going to get a double dose, of Mr. Elon Musk. We're going to talk about his unboxed approach to building a $25,000 car and then bringing adult content to the platform formerly known as Twitter.
We got a lot coming up. All right, first up, though, a check on that trading day. Here is John Tucker.
Yeah, we're seeing a little bit of hesitation on the part of investors. 7 of the 11 major industry groups in the S&P 500, they are higher. This comes ahead of important inflation data tomorrow. You just mentioned that. And some more Fed speak. The Fed chair, Jerome Powell, scheduled to deliver an address tomorrow. That's a day when markets are actually closed for the long holiday weekend. A Federal Reserve Governor, Christopher Waller, he was talking yesterday. He wants to see at least a couple more months of better inflation data before he starts cutting. Rite Aid, Amazon Pharmacy, confirming Eli Lilly's new weight loss drug, Zepbound, is in short supply. Multiple pharmacists across the U.S. telling Bloomberg earlier this week that some or all of the doses of the drug were on back order. Right now, the S&P 500, 13 points higher. That's up 0.3%, 52.62. Yes, Carol, we're on track for another record close.
Just want to make sure you're listening.
Dow Jones Industrial Average up 77 points. That's a rise of 0.2%. The NASDAQ Composite Index, 9 points higher right now, 16,408. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tim and Garrell.
Thank you so much, John Tucker. All right, everybody, we do get the Fed's favored inflation read tomorrow. We're talking about PCE. We'll also hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell as well, Tim, in a speech.
And we also got a little bit of news today. U.S. consumer sentiment rising toward the end of March. We're also going to get U.S. personal income and spending data as well. So let's spin it all forward and bring in Bloomberg News economics editor Molly Smith. She's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. So we got some news today, some economic news today. We're getting more tomorrow. Why is this happening on a day when the markets close?
Because it's, well, it's still going to be, well, I'll be working. I don't know about you guys.
That's the important thing.
So we may not exactly get a market reaction out of this tomorrow.
But why is the Fed chair speaking on a day when the market's closed? I mean,
I guess, no sleep for Jay.
Yeah.
He's a busy man. No sleep for the Commerce Department. They're still putting out the PCE report tomorrow. We'll have a bit of a busy day on the economics front tomorrow.
Tell us about what we need to watch out for PCE and Jay Powell.
I think on the PCE front, the headline number is probably going to look a little bit scarier, probably because gasoline prices were up in the month. So, as always, want to be looking at the core figure. That's really what the Fed cares about more. But that probably is on track to still register the biggest back-to-back increase in a year. So remember, we had a really strong January reading. Maybe this comes down a little bit in February, but still not really tracking with the 2% inflation goal.
Does it change the outlook for the Federal Reserve if it comes in extra hot?
They're bracing for this, and I think Powell had said actually the median forecast in the Bloomberg survey is calling for the core figure to rise 0.3% in February, month over month. Powell said at the meeting, was that last week already?
Yeah,
last week.
Isn't that
Wow,
crazy?
time flies.
Yeah.
He has said that their forecasts show it coming in significantly lower than that. I don't know what exactly significantly means, but I think they seem to be a bit more optimistic than the median forecast is.
We also get personal income and spending. I guess I bring it up because we got consumer sentiment today that rose markedly toward the end of March. So what we get about income and spending, so we know, right? The consumer is so important to our economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we got also today, we saw the final revision to the fourth quarter GDP figures showing that consumer spending there revised up pretty high. So yeah, the spending figures are all looking like pretty, robust so far and a lot better than expected. It's really been the story of the last year or two now. Really so much of this resilience just rooted in the job market, and it doesn't seem to be going away.
GDP, though, it's backwards looking. So, yes, great spending we knew at the end of year, but for the most part, do you discard it? Does the Fed discard it?
Oh, no. I think that's still very much fitting into the story that a lot of people are kind of coalescing around this idea of not a hard landing, not a soft landing, but maybe a no landing, that the economy just reaccelerates and growth continues.
Got some comments from Chris Waller yesterday after the market closed.
Made us all sit up a little straighter.
Yeah, but they're not hitting the market.
He has a way
today.
of doing that.
They're not hitting the market today.
Yeah, you did see the 2-year yield pop a bit on that yesterday. The move a bit more muted today, but he's obviously one of the more outspoken hawkish members of the committee, and saying that there's really the more strongest conviction that we've seen out of Fed officials saying we're really not rushing to cut rates, perhaps even going to delay rate cuts because of the strength of the data that we've seen. So better believe when he says something like, I don't know, pay attention to CPI revisions, something that people usually sleep on, we're all going to be looking at it.
Do you think Jay Powell will somehow say something similar to what Waller said? Okay, we're still on track to cut, but no rush to do it.
So this is where I kind of have difficulty digesting Fed speak, is that they more or less are all kind of saying some variation of the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? But I think it's kind of widely interpreted that Powell is maybe a bit more dovish member of the committee, whereas Waller is considered to be more aggressive on the hawkish side.
I do feel like there's horse trading, in the words between the Fed officials. You take this phrase, I'll take this phrase. And
I like to call it a game of Mad Libs, really. Just trying to fill in what they're saying and parsing through the words.
All right, well, we'll be listening for your reporting and also reading about it. Molly, thank you so much. Molly Smith, of course, economics editor at Bloomberg News, here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio.
Well, a salvage firm that helped contain the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and safely blow up part of New York's Tappan Zee Bridge is heading to Baltimore as a first step to what will likely become a more than $2 billion rebuilding project.
Yeah, and Tim, someone who knows the Baltimore area very well, having been born there, is well known to our Bloomberg audience, as he is the host of peer-to-peer conversations on Bloomberg, is Carlyle co-founder and co-chairman David Rubenstein, who I caught up with last night to talk about the bridge as well as some news earlier in the day. We started, though, on the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. I want to start with something that we have certainly been focusing on the last 24 hours or so, and that is what's going on in Baltimore. You were raised there, born there. The collapse, obviously, of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. How important is this bridge to the area? What does it mean to the people who live in and around that area?
it's an important bridge to people in this area. It's an important bridge for the country in many ways because many important ships go through that channel there. But the bridge itself is iconic, well known, named after a very famous person, of course, Francis Scott Key. But it is a sad situation that it couldn't have been prevented. Apparently, the ship lost control or lost its power, and therefore it couldn't control where it went, based on what I read. And I think that at this point, there's been a loss of life. It's tragic. The governor is on top of it. He's an incredibly impressive person, and he and the Secretary of Transportation are on top of what needs to be done. And President Biden has said that the federal government will put up the money to fix the bridge, but it's going to take time. So there'll have to be a way to figure out how to get people across that area, which is otherwise, reached by the bridge. But, sad situation for the city for sure.
But I just want to ask you, as someone who's lived in the area, right? I think, when we live across the country or we're not from that area, we think, okay, it's another bridge. And obviously loss of life, first and foremost, we feel bad for that. But I'm just, in terms of the area and you growing up in that area, like how you think about that bridge.
Well, the bridge is one that is an important part of the commerce of this area. Important for people that live in the area. It wasn't actually built when I was growing up in Baltimore. It was built afterwards, but it's an important bridge and serves a great purpose. It's just so tragic that the ship lost power and it was in the middle of the night and you couldn't really help easily rescue people. But Baltimore has had many challenges in recent years. This is a challenge, but this is a challenge that, we can recover. You can't recover the lives of people who are gone. But I think the bridge can be rebuilt. It just takes time to build bridges, and therefore there'll have to be some temporary measures to get people across that area.
We certainly have heard from various government officials about that, specifically about the time that's going to be needed to get certainly the port up and running, but even more importantly, the longer term time that it will take in terms of getting that bridge rebuilt. Are you confident that the government will do what it needs to get that bridge rebuilt in a timely manner?
I'm confident that the government has the intent to get it done as quickly as possible. And the President of the United States, the Governor of Maryland, the Mayor of Baltimore, all unified. It's not a political issue. Just a question of, it's something that it takes time to build, and you got to redesign a bridge, and you got to get structural engineers, and you got to get construction people. So it's a multi-year effort to get that rebuilt. There's no doubt.
And as I said, we've heard from the government. Is there something that the private sector can do? Is there a public private partnership that needs to be thought about in terms of getting this bridge up and running and rebuilt?
Well, typically you have public-private partnerships when there's a need to involve the private sector in some way, and the government can help with financial support. Here, the government is putting up all the money necessary for the rebuild. So the private sector, I think, can probably help the most by raising funds for the families who lost their loved ones in this tragic accident. And I think that's something the federal government doesn't typically provide support for. And so I think you'll see private sector money focused on that for the immediate future.
All right. And David, we definitely obviously appreciate you weighing in on the collapse.
Sure.
I think we would be remiss not to ask about some big news for you personally today, and that is about the Baltimore Orioles. You tweeted it out about ownership. Major League Baseball's owners today unanimously approving you as the new controlling owner of the Baltimore Orioles just before opening season begins, or the season begins. Congratulations. You've wanted this team for years. What's gone through your mind now that you've got it?
Well, whenever you achieve something you want, you always have to wonder what bad things can happen because life can't always be perfect. So I'm very pleased. We have a great team, a great investment group that I've assembled. But, it's 162 games, and it's, you're considered successful if you win, 100 or so of them. So you're going to lose a fair number of games. So we have an opening day tomorrow. Hopefully the weather will cooperate, and we'll do well in opening day. But it's a long season. I'm just pleased that I was able to do this. I came from very modest circumstances in Baltimore. Never dreamed that I would be able to buy the Orioles when I was growing up. But, life moves forward in strange ways, and things worked out. And I'm happy to view this as a way to help give back to Baltimore for having helped me get a very good education here.
I feel like it's an obvious question. I'm assuming you will be sitting in the owner's box tomorrow at Camden Yards.
It's an obvious question, but the answer is not obvious. I have some friends, relatives, and others coming, but I don't want to be there that long because I want to move around the stadium and see what the fans think, and I'll be sitting in various parts of the stadium and sitting next to average fans. That's what I hope to do in that game and other games.
That's really lovely to hear. And the other thing I want to ask you is, it's a team obviously you've thought about for a long time. As you said, you feel, I can hear it in your voice, that lucky to have it as your team and be part of the ownership there. It is a young team, made the playoffs last year. What are your plans? How are you thinking about that?
We have the best manager in the American League, as voted by the league last year, and the best general manager. Nobody has ever thought that my baseball expertise was quite at the level of those two individuals, so I'm going to rely on them on what to do, and I'll try to be as supportive as possible from the business side. But clearly on the player side, we have it in the hands of people that are really experts, and my job is to kind of help them do what they need to do.
So if they say we need to spend more on the team payroll, would you be up for that?
I'm going to follow the advice of the people that know what they're doing in baseball. So I'll look at what they recommend. So I just don't want to be committing to any one thing or getting people's hopes up beyond what I can realistically do. So I think I want to rely on Mike Elias, who's the incredible general manager we have, and Brandon Hyde, the great manager we have. And beyond that, I don't think I can say more.
Hey, listen, and I don't know what you can say about the dispute that's been going on for a long time with Masson. Is there anything in terms of moving that forward and getting some kind of resolution?
I do think that it would be helpful to baseball generally and helpful to the Nationals and the Orioles to have some type of resolution. But obviously, when you have something that's going on for 10 years of dispute, no one can come in overnight and say, I've got a solution that none of you thought of. So it's something that we want to resolve. I think the Commissioner of Baseball would like to see it resolved, but it's going to take some time to dig into it. And obviously, lawyers have benefited from this over the years, but hopefully we can get it resolved without the lawyers being too deeply involved, and we can get it resolved before too long. But beyond that, I can't really say.
Hey, David, one more thing. You talk about tomorrow, being among the fans and walking around the stadium. And I do wonder how you think about it. I know it's something we talk about in New York a lot, about the expensive cost of taking a family of four to go see a team. And how do you think about, making this, wonderful sport and this team, accessible to everyone?
Well, people in New York who want to go to a baseball game might find it cheaper to come to the Orioles game than to go to the Mets or the Yankees game. So we welcome everybody in New York to come to Baltimore, which is less expensive and a beautiful city, charm city as it's known. So I think the prices here are more affordable, even with the transportation. So I hope people from New York who might be listening will say, let's go to Baltimore.
All right, I'm going to let all the New York fans. Hey, I lied. One more question. You've been the chairman of the Kennedy Center Honors for 14 years. You've got one more year. You step down tomorrow. I know it sounds like taking something off your plate. You've got a lot going on, is understandable. But any thoughts about that? It's something that I've enjoyed watching with my family, and I'm just curious, as you wrap that up and move on to other things, how you're thinking about that.
Well, the Kennedy Center has been something I've chaired for 14 years. I'll finish at the end of December, but then I'll become the chairman of the Kennedy Center Foundation, which is designed to help raise money for the endowment of the Kennedy Center. So I'll still be involved there a bit, but I think it's a good time to get somebody who's younger and fresher than me. And I have one more honors to do, and we're going to pick the honorees in the near future, and hopefully everybody will think it's a great selection.
All right, David, thank you so much. Any celebrating tonight?
We have the investors and many of the key people in the Orioles organization having a dinner tonight, and I will host that dinner with some of my partners, yes.
All right, that, of course, is Carlyle co-founder and co-chairman David Rubenstein. Conversation I had with him last evening, obviously talking about the bridge, but also the news yesterday that he is now the owner of the Baltimore Orioles. That's a big deal, John Tucker.
Does that mean we get tickets?
Well, we should point out...
How does this benefit me, John Tucker?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I'm kidding.
We should point out, though, Michael R. Bloomberg, of course, the founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies, is also part of that investor group.
I will just say, it's just like when the Yankees here in New York go play Baltimore. Camden Yards is a fantastic stadium.
Love that stadium.
Yeah, it's a great trip, by the way. Sometimes you get more Yankee fans in Baltimore than
Because it's a good deal? Because it's cheaper? Or what?
It's a great trip.
Yeah, it's a great trip. All right, folks. Carol Master, Tim Stanovic. More to come. We're going to talk about the markets right here on Bloomberg.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stage ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to build a path towards that. Almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level up your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
When I was younger, I used to be in bands. I'd play drums in bands and toured America with them, did a lot of session drumming, recorded albums. So yeah, it was good fun doing the drumming. The only reason I stopped it, well, I still play, but not as serious as I did when I was younger, but drumming doesn't pay the bills. I was never good enough to be able to pay the bills with it, but it was good fun. I started RJF, and the reason I started it was I saw a gap in the market for particular early stage and startup businesses. With the experience that I've got of running businesses, of being a finance director at the very biggest companies in the world to being finance director of small startups, we were looking at providing more than just basic accountancy services. So yes, we'll do all that. We'll do all the basic, all the statutory side of things that you need to do. But there's so much more value that we can add, and I wanted to have my experience to help these startups, because a lot of them don't really know where to go. You can go to your high street accountants and they can do a good job compliance-wise, but you would question whether they've actually been in the fire line of a business. Have you been in a business where you're thinking, how do I pay wages next week? Or business is really successful, what do we do with it next? Or how do we grow it? How do we grow into international territories? Or how do we grow our markets? How do we expand? So a lot of the experience I've seen over the years and seen different types of business in different sectors, I thought, well, it's a real value that I can add to these businesses as opposed to just being an FD, because a lot of these businesses can't afford an FD. But if we can take care of their statutory side of things, the compliance side of things, I'm on hand to be able to help and advise businesses with their growth strategy, or if they're in difficulty, help them through these times.
Points. The Nasdaq Composite Index 1 point higher. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Carol and Tim.
Thank you so much for that update, John Tucker. You mentioned Apple. So we want to go further with Apple, the company in the crosshairs of, it seems, regulators around the globe. Here in the U.S., as you know, 1 week ago, the U.S. Justice Department and 16 attorneys general sued Apple, accusing the iPhone maker of violating antitrust laws by blocking rivals from accessing hardware and software features on its popular devices.
Indeed. Well, our next guest believes misguided antitrust actions could harm consumers and small businesses and only lead to increased government intervention. So here to explain her view is Jennifer Huddleston. She's Technology Policy Research Fellow at the Cato Institute, adjunct professor at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School, and she joins us from Washington, D.C. Jennifer, good to have you here on Bloomberg. So let's get to it. It sounds like you don't agree with this action by the U.S. Justice Department. Lay it out for us.
What we have is the U.S. Justice Department trying to very narrowly define a market in order to show a market dominance that doesn't actually reflect the reality that most consumers have or why Apple is a large, successful company. Instead, what we have is a bit of a return of a big is bad mentality, the idea that certain companies, because of their size, should be immediately subject to greater regulatory scrutiny. But if we think about some of the issues brought up in the complaint, things like the idea that you get a green bubble in messaging if you have an Android device, the reality is that many consumers are choosing from a lot of different messaging options, not just text message and iMessage, but any array of apps that are out there like WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, and so on. This also makes a lot of presumptions about what the smartphone market is. The average consumer, when they're choosing a smartphone, is going to consider many, many different features beyond just the operating system. They may be thinking about things like the camera or the availability of certain apps or the privacy and security features of a phone.
Hey, one thing I do want to just, for transparency, make clear to our audience is understand the funding of the Cato Institute. We do this with our think tank guests. So give us an idea of where the funding comes from for the Cato Institute and if Apple is one of the companies that does support the Cato Institute.
I'm here to talk about my research. I don't work on our development team. The Cato Institute is funded by a wide range of individuals, and I can direct any questions you might have on that to the appropriate sources.
All right, and companies, though, to be fair. So we just want to make sure that transparency is out there. Well, what is it about your research says that, consumers would be hurt and small businesses would be hurt by this decision?
Well, when we look at what's gone on in the past when we have seen something that was not the consumer welfare standard applied in antitrust, whether it was in the U.S. in a prior antitrust era, or if it was looking to Europe, what we have traditionally seen is that focuses more on subjective means of measuring what is good and bad for competition. And it really sets up for a potential government intervention against politically disfavored companies. And it can actually take away some of those very features that consumers enjoy, whether it's the ability to know that an ecosystem is closed and therefore they feel that it's more secure because they know that that's the way that the product was designed, or whether it is to look at other aspects of the smartphone market, particularly for small for App Store developers. This could change the way that the App Store works as well, and the way that different elements that are currently available are, such that it makes it much more complicated and in some ways could make every phone the same rather than really allowing a wider range of options for consumers.
Jennifer, what about the take rate for Apple, that 30% fee that it takes from stuff that's purchased through apps that are downloaded from the Apple App Store? I'm wondering your thoughts on that and if there are any antitrust concerns about that. Just to remind our viewers and listeners, it's the idea that when you buy something through an app that you downloaded through Apple's App Store, whether or not that app comes from Apple or not, Apple does get and these are digital goods we're talking about, Apple does get a portion of that. And that's what really set things off with regulators, and that's where Epic Games was coming from.
And we've actually already seen that issue largely litigated in the Epic Games case, in which the court found mostly in favor of Apple's process. I think the question there is also, is that actually an antitrust concern? Is that actually an anti-competitive behavior? Or is that a matter of contract law? Is this a case of companies that can negotiate with each other over a fee the way that we would see in an offline world? If this was a shopping mall, for example, or Walmart or a department store like Nordstrom, and they were having a negotiation with someone who wanted to sell something in their space, we would say that's a contract negotiation. And different companies may or may not like the terms of those contracts, but we would say that's a contract dispute and not necessarily an antitrust issue.
Jennifer, what would rise to the an antitrust issue, in your opinion, when it comes to Apple? What would you have to see from the company to say, okay, this is an instance where we need to see regulators get involved?
We would want to see something that indicated that it was anti-competitive behavior and not just the case of having a product that responds to what consumers want and having a product that has been very popular with consumers. So we would be looking for things that were actually somehow distorting the market as opposed to something that's just a result of a company's success. We want companies to be responding to what their consumers want and creating products that meet those demands. And that may mean that they're successful and that they drive innovation as a result, that other companies have to really rise to that challenge.
Well, to be fair, I mean, we talk about it a lot, right, Tim? We've talked about, I mean, I'm an Apple family, and we've made a choice, and so everything we do is within the Apple universe. And having said that, we don't necessarily, as consumers, know that if Apple was more open with its platform, whether or not we might benefit from that as consumers. So it's hard to kind of make that case, right, without knowing whether or not, by opening it up and not being so closed in terms of the Apple system, whether or not we actually might benefit.
There is an alternative system out there in that the Android system provides a different option. And so for people that are looking at wanting to have that more side-loading experience, there are options out there where there's a wider range of operating systems. Apple has really tried to distinguish itself in the market through kind of having this closed ecosystem that they market as better for privacy and security. And that's part of their marketing strategy and what they feel is their role and their competitive advantage in the market. Intervening in that would take away a company's option of really portraying themselves as that privacy-centric option.
I'm wondering what you think of the idea of an environment being created where startups can flourish. And I think that a lot of people would point to the antitrust action taken against Microsoft in the 90s that essentially hobbled Microsoft for so many years, created this foundation in Silicon Valley where a lot of startups that are now the biggest companies in the world were actually able to succeed and flourish. Do you think Apple and other big companies are preventing startups from succeeding in this day and age because of their size?
We continue to have a really flourishing ecosystem of startups in the U.S., and we're very lucky that there are very low barriers to entry to start a company because of how we've had a light touch regulatory approach to regulation. I get concerned with some of the calls to change antitrust law around mergers and acquisitions, not only for the impact that could have on large companies, but for the impact that could have on some of those small companies. Some companies want to be the next Apple, the next Google, the next Microsoft, and IPO and get really big. Others are looking at other exit strategies where they want to make an existing product better, or perhaps, there's someone who the better option is to get acquired by a large company and continue to be a serial entrepreneur. So what we ideally want is something that has a wide range of exit strategies for companies of all sizes so that they're really focused on benefiting consumers and on trying and failing in the marketplace.
Jennifer, we only have 15 seconds left, but how do you think this plays out in court over the next few years?
I think the next few years is key there. This is going to be a long case. We're going to see a lot of conversations and a lot of further discussion on this issue.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Hey, listen, thank you so much. Jennifer Huddleston, Technology Policy Research Fellow at the Cato Institute, joining us from Washington, D.C. And I will say, Tim, our own legal analysis, Jen Rhee here at our Bloomberg Intelligence team on this case, saying that, it's probably going to be 3 years in the making, and says that there is a lot that can happen in the technology world that might make it a very different case in that time frame.
Once again, a good thing for lawyers.
Lawyers
out there. They always seem to win. Hey, let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. Crypto mogul Sam Bankman-Fried has been sentenced to 25 years in prison for orchestrating what prosecutors frame as, quote, likely the largest fraud of the last decade. Bloomberg Law host June Grasso says the judge clearly wanted to send a message.
The judge said that there's a risk that this man will be in a position to do something very bad in the future, and it's not a trivial risk. Part of my sentence will be for the purpose of disabling him to the extent that it can be appropriately done to him for a significant period of time.
Again, Bloomberg Law host June Grasso. Bankman-Fried told the court today he was sorry for his actions. Agents with Immigration and Customs Enforcement are targeting undocumented migrants convicted of serious drug offenses but who have evaded authorities. We get more from Bloomberg's Irv Chapman.
The agents had a list of 419 who had been convicted of drug trafficking and other offenses and nabbed 216 of them in a 12-day operation. Acting Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, P.J. Lechleitner, said.
You have to do a lot of legwork trying to figure out where they're at. There's a lot of criminal intelligence that goes into this as they move around. For the most part, it's really good gumshoe work, so it just takes time. Sometimes you just get lucky as well as a cop.
Lechleitner said the job would have been easier, except that some jurisdictions refuse to turn over criminals who complete their sentences for deportation. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
In a legally binding order, the top UN court says Israel must open more land crossings into Gaza for food, water, fuel, and other supplies. It is opening day in the major leagues. The Baltimore Orioles held an 8-second moment of silence for the 6 workers killed in the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge and the survival of 2 others. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom. This Bloomberg Business Flash. We keep this up, we could see another record close for the S&P 500. That would make how many, Carol?
22nd.
Our 22nd. All right, now let's head over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Hello, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, John. U.S. stocks are quiet right now, with the Dow currently up 75 points. S&Ps are higher by 12, but NASDAQ is lower by 5. The U.S. 10-year yield at 4.2%. Gold is up 25. Oil also with a bid, and Bitcoin is higher by 2.7%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were utilities and energy, modest losses in tech and telecom, and leaders to the upside in the Dow, Disney, Verizon, and 3M, while Apple led to the downside. In the crypto space, Sam Bankman-Fried was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and after earnings, Jefferies fell 4%. Wrapping things up, Estee Lauder rose 6% after a Bank of America upgrade. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. John?
All right, thanks a lot, Bill. And remember, tomorrow, a holiday for the markets. The bond market today closed at 2 p.m. Again, the S&P 500, 12 points higher. Thanks, Bill. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type SQUA on your Bloomberg terminal. We check the markets for you all day long.
How many
right
records?
here on Bloomberg
How many records
Radio.
might it be?
What did you say again?
22.
22.
If.
That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, TikTok. Just about 18 minutes left in today's trading session. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic getting ready to wrap up the holiday shortened trading week and wrap up, Tim, the first quarter. That was quite a stellar quarter if you were a bull in the equity markets here in the U.S.
Yeah, really curious what Alan Zaffron has to say about that. He's founding partner and co-CEO at IEQ Capital. He joins us once again from Foster City, California. Alan, how are you?
I'm great, Tim and Carol. How are you doing?
We're doing pretty well. Hard to believe.
We just opened up our 401ks and we're like,
no,
okay.
No, the trick, Carol, is never look. That's the trick.
Don't you
never
look
look
periodically?
Yes.
Of course you do.
Yeah, way too much.
All right.
What do you think of what happened this quarter? I mean, how does it mesh with what you thought would happen in the first quarter of the year? And where do you think we're going in the remaining 75% of the year?
Well, first of all, the equity rally surprised me probably as much as many investment professionals. So now we're calling it a 501k or 601k, Carol, not a 401k.
Right.
I like that.
But, you know, here's what happened. In retrospect, it's easy to see it in retrospect. The market, investors basically determined the Fed pivoted its policy in mid-October. And the easiest way to consider that is you look at the yield on the 2-year Treasury. It peaked in mid-October around 5.25%. It's right now at about 4.62%. Once the market concluded the Fed had pivoted, everyone concluded it was time to be bullish again and put money back into the markets. And if you look at history, markets always rally, even if economic activity is weakening post the Fed pivot. So that's what we think is happening. You have a liquidity washed market, and it goes to the old adage, time in the market is better than timing the market. So despite my skepticism with a looming recession, sitting on our hands and not taking steps to make any changes ended up being the right decision.
Having said that, okay, so we're getting ready for the Powell pivot, or Powell and Company pivoted. But yesterday, as we've been talking about, Alan, Fed Governor Chris Waller saying that recent inflation data make him hesitant to cut rates as soon as he did a couple of months ago. And it's kind of interesting. So, you do wonder, and I'm curious about what Jay Powell will say ultimately tomorrow, whether or not we're starting to get a little bit more managed about, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 1, maybe it's none. Like, I don't know. I guess we need to see and read the tea leaves here.
You're actually highlighting what we think is a greater risk to the market. Here's the irony. We would tell you greater economic strength with more inflation and a higher rate environment is actually more problematic and scary in the short run for markets than a slowdown economically, even into a recession. In other words, we're at a near all-time high of correlation with where yields are and what's happening with stock prices. And so our view is the biggest near-term risk to the market is not a slowdown economically. it's a pickup in inflation, a Fed that doesn't lower the Fed funds rate, and people have to unwind all their expectations about the rate cuts, and we change the valuations we're paying for these stocks. So that is, in fact, the risk.
What's the balance of someone like you who watches the markets, has to come out with advice and say the balance between, okay, growth, good, a little bit of inflation, good, maybe, versus a recession or deep recession and fallout?
Well, stocks historically are actually an inflation hedge. It's only in times of extreme inflation where stock markets tend to fall, or disinflation with a recession. So we would argue, it's semantics, but whether it's 1.5% to 3.5% inflation is completely tolerable. What you're really looking for in the long run is, if you think about it mathematically, stocks are giving you real GDP growth of around 4%, inflation of another 3%. You get your 2% dividend yield. On average, stock share counts drop by about 1% a year. More shares are repurchased or redeemed than issued. So 4, 3, 2, 1, that's a 10% rate of return. That's the historical rate of return in the market. So inflation doesn't prevent the 4% economic growth as long as it's kind of in that 1.5% to 4% range. The problem is when it gets too low, it's telling you there's no growth in the economy, or when it's way too high, consumers can't afford to pay prices anymore. Companies have to raise prices to the point they crowd out consumption, and it leads to recession. So inflation is okay to a point, and in this environment we're in, it's plenty fine as long as the pressure isn't great enough to cause rates to go a lot higher.
Hey, Alan, I've been asking all our guests about asset allocation lately, given that we are seeing really highs in a lot of different asset classes right now. Someone comes to you with new money. How do you deploy it?
Obviously, let's go back to risk tolerance, investment timeline, age, goals, objectives, income needs, tax rate. But as a generalization, we would argue it's no different than any other time, but we would always argue whatever you're going into, dollar cost average. So if I was going to tell you you are 40 years old, you might be 60% stocks and 40% bonds, but that's 60% in stocks. I'm going to take 10 to 12 months to dollar cost average you in, so you're buying 10% of the stocks every month for 10 months, and you get an average cost. You don't put all the money in on day one, because it's very hard emotionally to put all your money in the stock market, and 3 weeks later, if the market's down, you'll panic. So we would tell you it's status quo. It's no different than a normal time right now, but normal time means you tiptoe into markets. You don't put all your eggs into the basket on the very first day.
All right. So you shared with our producer, Paul Brennan, 10 market themes for 2024. You believe a new bull market is underway, Alan. Lower interest rates finally bring economic reacceleration in sight. Markets are volatile, but we think they resolve higher. And you say this bull market, this new bull market, requires a different playbook, and that you believe interest rates and inflation will ultimately settle at a higher baseline level compared to the last 15 years. So this is a rethink. Do we get the Fed to buy in on that rethink, you think, anytime soon, and kind of admit that?
Yeah, I do. I actually think the Fed has already admitted it, but they don't want to be a Fed like Arthur Burns in the 1970s that let inflation creep back in and created a massive recession. So what they're going to do is they're purposely going slowly. They'd rather keep rates a little bit too high, a little too long, to guide us into this new economic environment, than lower rates too quickly, reinstigate inflation, and cause a greater havoc. So I do think that's the playbook, but I think they are, in fact, going to be methodical, working us back down in the way they tiptoe us back down on the yield curve.
Favorite investment idea, somewhere where you would commit money right now, and be as specific as you can?
Private credit. So you can buy both in public markets, there are vehicles, as well as in the private markets. Private credit is basically a set of loans, senior and floating rate, issued to largely the private companies. And because they're tied to effectively the Fed funds rate, it's called SOFR. It's like what LIBOR was. Companies you as the investor are lending money to a basket of businesses that are giving you anywhere from 5.5% to 7.5% above the 5.5% Fed funds rate. So you're making
no worry, though. There's a lot of transparency concerns about that, Alan. Just got about 20 seconds.
But if you're the senior floating rate lender on loans that are 3 to 4, and if you go into a pool of thousands of loans, the propensity to lose money in that is exceptionally small. So an experienced manager with a well-diversified portfolio can make a very good private credit issuance. Note it's ordinary income, so that's the challenge.
It's an argument in favor we've heard a lot about, but interesting. And there's also, though, some nervousness about the sector. Alan, thank you so much. Have a good holiday weekend. Alan Zafran, founding partner, co-CEO at IEQ Capital, joining us there from California. This is Bloomberg.
Today, I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need. Like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
Watchful, they're the folks who track app development testing. The X groups will then feature an adult content label. Users who fail to label their community could see some of the content being filtered out. Communities on X can be private, though it's unclear if the social media network will ultimately require age verification for groups that do feature the adult content. Bud Light's comeback hopes about to get dashed in the beer aisle. Major grocery chains are just starting an annual spring right. This is where they reshuffle the alcohol aisle to give more space to the top sellers. And this reset means fewer feet of shelf space for Bud Light, which hasn't fully recovered from a conservative-led backlash last year. And that is your company news.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenevec. Just got about 5 minutes left in today's trading session. Actually, about 4.5. So let's be exact on that. John Tucker, of course, just talking about where we are in the trade as we get ready to wrap up the week.
How are we looking, Carol?
First quarter.
We're on pace for another record close for the S&P 500, Carol.
And it would be number?
How many? I keep forgetting.
22. This would be the 22nd record close for the S&P 500 this year.
Help me. 22nd.
Help.
It's also, I believe, the market weight on the S&P, too. The market-weighted S&P also, I think, near a record, too.
Equal weighted.
Yeah, sorry, market-weighted, equal-weighted. Yeah, thank you for that.
No problem. We watch out for each other here.
I need a cup of coffee. You know what's interesting? SOX is up about 17% year-to-date in the first quarter. Top-performing major industry group in the S&P 500 so far this year.
Do you know the top...
That's my drum roll.
Best-performing stock?
Or the group of the industry.
Could you answer my question
There are
first?
11 major
Wait, what's
industry
your
groups
question?
in the S&P 500.
Yeah, what's the major industry group?
I would have said
There are 11.
information technology.
Communication services.
Okay,
That's all those big tech
close.
names, right? You know what's number one in that group? Again, drum roll.
SMCI?
Meta Platforms up almost 38%
So far this year.
year to date.
Wow.
That's cray-cray. Disney's up 35%. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Sorry. Netflix
You can
is up 25%.
do all these things on the Bloomberg terminal.
Well, you know, sometimes, though, I do believe it. I believe everything that's on the Bloomberg terminal. but
What's
it's
the
sometimes-
worst performing stock in the S&P 500 since the beginning of the year?
I want to cheat.
Tesla.
Is it really?
29%.
That's the worst performing
lower.
name in the S&P 500?
Yes.
Wow.
And Supermicro Computer, 256% higher since the start of the year.
That's the best
in the
performing.
S&P 500.
Which one's
That's
Supermicro?
the best.
But it
Supermicro.
hasn't been in the S&P 500 since the beginning of the year.
That would go to NVIDIA then, because that's up 82%.
Tesla, you think Triple X is going to...
MRR,
What'd you say?
member ranked return.
You said maybe we should call it Triple X?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about this.
We're going to get
next
into
hour.
racy content.
We're going to talk about this next hour, but what's going on?
That should have been our one more thing.
There's still time.
Oh, did I steal your thunder by doing that story?
No,
No,
you didn't.
you
We're
actually
gonna talk
set
about
us
it later.
up because we're going to talk about it later. Because it's kind of
This
interesting.
is a deep tease for the X story.
There's that, and then Elon looking at a cheaper car.
Double dose of Elon Musk.
More to come, more to come, more to come. Folks, don't go anywhere. Over to our TV colleagues we go. That's because Beyond the Bell starts right now.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Alex Steele. We're counting you down to the closing bell. And here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast. We're joined right now by Scarlett, the Dax Foo, here in the television studio. Tim, the bicycle Stenovic. And unfortunately, Carol Massar, I think, just got 25 years in prison. But pleased to say we're going to break down all of the action for you here on the final trading day of the quarter.
I'm done.
Innocent until proven guilty for Carol.
Not even close. Listen, big day, right? Interesting story in terms of SBF. I do think we definitely closed the chapter, right, on one era of, I kind of feel like the crypto story, but more to come. But yeah, pretty big sentence. A lot of people, it was interesting to hear some of the experts weigh in and say they thought it was kind of too hefty.
Yeah, we spoke. We did an hour-long special on this from 12 to 1 today for Bloomberg Crypto on Bloomberg TV, and we kind of had not anyone really told us that the sentence was just right. We had a couple people weigh in and say that it was too lenient, and a couple people weigh in and say we thought it was too much of a sentence, too long of a sentence. What I want to know is where this $11 billion is going to come from, because that's how much, that's part of the sentence as well. So it's 25 years, but also he owes $11 billion.
Yeah, exactly. Is he going to have to cash out of something? Are his parents going to have to pony up the money for it? What
Who
happened
can pony
to
up
the money?
$11 billion?
Well, what happened to the money that he allegedly took? Where does that all go? This story is not going to end anytime soon. We'll find out what happens on Netflix in about 5 years.
More chapters to come, right?
Yeah, I have no idea. That was my
Series.
question, is like, where do you get the money, kind of, where does that go? But then moving on here from that, you wind up having a really amazing first quarter. And I say amazing because it doesn't feel like investors were positioned for the quarter that we actually saw, with record high after record high. What about 22 record highs for the S&P?
Yeah, this is going to go down really in the record books. Of course, this is not, of course, the best quarter ever, but I think when you consider just how much it defied expectations, definitely something that we'll be talking about for years to come. On a daily basis, not a whole lot of action here. The Dow Jones Industrial Average higher on the day, but only by about 0.1%. However, it is sitting on a gain of 2% for the month of March, 6% for the first quarter. The S&P 500 higher by 0.1% here on the day, 3% on the month, 10% on the quarter. The NASDAQ lower on the day by about 0.1%, but it is going to finish the month of March with a 2% gain, and the first quarter of 2024 up 9%, and the Russell 2000 also getting in on the action here. Modest gains here on the day of about 0.5%, but you can add 3 percentage points here on a monthly basis, 5 percentage points higher on the quarter.
Yeah, definitely a bullish quarter, no doubt about it, when it comes to the equity universe. Having said that, guys, top performing name in the S&P 500 in the first quarter of 2024, Supermicro Computer up about 255%. Bottom of the pack, we're talking about Tesla, which is down more than 29% here so far in this first quarter. So, yeah.
Let's take a look at how things shaped up on the final trading day of this first quarter. In terms of the best performing sectors, a lot of green, first of all. You only have 3 sectors in the red, and the worst performing communication services only fell 0.3%. But energy, utilities, and REITs are the 3 best performers. And it's worth noting that utilities and REITs are some of the worst performers so far this year. So a little bit of a reversal there. Communication services, consumer discretionary, and tech, which of course houses the Magnificent Seven, are the laggards on the day.
All right, guys, let's get to some of the individual gainers, if I may, on this Thursday. Hey, Estee Lauder, I think you guys were talking about it earlier on TV, finishing just off its highs of the session, so up more than 6%. It is the #1 gainer in the S&P 500 today. B of A upgrading the stock to buy from neutral, saying that the company's earnings have now bottomed. This, of course, remember, in early February, the company unveiled a surprise restructuring. They cut workers. They said they're going to focus more on kind of growth initiatives, if you will. B of A writing that both company-specific and macro factors were responsible for driving negative revisions over the past 2 years, and they say they have measures in place to support a profit recovery, sharpen brand and product efficiency and proposition. So very optimistic, B of A. They lifted their 2026 EPS estimate and moved the price target on Estee Lauder to $170 from $160 a share. Stock closing at $154 and change. Another name that was among the top gainers in the NASDAQ 100, Analog Devices. That one finishing the day up about 2.3% here. And this is interesting. That's despite a cautious call out from UBS on the chip group. They did note, though, on the positive, semis have quality fundamentals, historically the best growth rate, and no sign of overinvestment. And so UBS analysts favoring cheaper names such as SEC and also ADI, so Analog Devices on that list. Also, they mentioned TSMC, TI, and Infineon among those that they also like. And just quickly want to mention United Parks and Recreation. That one finishing the day with about a gain of about 5.5%. The company's holders approving a $500 million buyback, amending their agreement with Hill Path Capital. Basically, the company's not going to buy back shares if Hill Path stock ownership in United Parks exceeds 50%. So some business stuff there. But anyway, talking about a buyback and setting that stock higher in today's session.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the decliners. I do want to start with Apple dragging the S&P 500 today. A couple bits of Apple news that did send shares lower, or perhaps investors just chewed on as they traded. Mark Gurman reporting that Apple's going to be coming out with a new iPad very soon. It has been about 18 months since the last updates, so a new iPad would mark the end to the longest stretch without new models in the history of the iPad, which was first introduced all the way back in 2010, and that was by Steve Jobs. Shares finishing down by 1.1%. Apple was also cut from buy to hold over at DZ Bank early this morning. Shares of Palantir.
Are you getting one of
falling.
these new iPads, Tom?
No. iPads aren't the thing that people upgrade that frequently, right? Like, we have an old iPad, and it totally does the trick.
Yeah, because it's just your kids watching it. Same for me. So,
it has a big,
they don't know the difference.
Alex, you know, it has a big, like, foam case
Totally.
around it because it just gets dropped all the time. So,
yeah. I feel you. I get that.
You know what I'm talking about.
I do.
So no new iPad yet. It's very durable, by the way. Palantir shares falling today by more than 6%. This after Moness downgraded the company from sell to neutral. Analyst Brian White writes that the stock has, quote, an egregiously rich valuation following gains from AI-related optimism. And AMC Entertainment is back in the news. Shares falling today by double digits. This after the company said that it entered into an equity distribution agreement, essentially saying it can sell shares up to $250 million. This would be Class A common stock. Shares falling by 14.3%. After all, it is a dilutive event. And finally, honorable mention, Reddit. Shares falling in their worst day since the company went public last week, falling more than 14%. We did get a regulatory filing after the market closed yesterday that showed some insider selling. Those people include Steve Huffman, the company's CEO, Jennifer Wong, who does own more than 4% of the company, and also the company's CFO as well.
All right, let's take a look at the bond market here. You did have the bond market close around 2 p.m., and it was a sell-off in the front end, really yields up by about 5 basis points, which we got that pretty strong fourth quarter GDP revision for the fourth quarter. But overall, it was quite a quarter for bonds. The 2-year yield moved 37 basis points. That was the biggest quarterly rise since June of 2023. And not to belabor the point here, but the German 2-year yield rose 44 basis points. I'm just saying that all of this is showing that as you see the push out of central bankers, not yet for a cut, those front ends are really moving.
Yeah, and it should be pointed out, and I'm glad you bring that up because we focus so much on the big gains that we've seen in equities, and you kind of forget there was a lot of activity, believe it or not, in that space. You had a lot of activity with the dollar moving higher, about 3% on the quarter here, and then, of course, there was Bitcoin. That was, what, up 60%
yeah.
So not a bad quarter all around cross-asset-wise, and it was a broadening the rally too, guys. I mean, we talk so much about AI, but look at the gainers just in March. I mean, the top 10 gainers, they weren't AI and tech stocks. I mean, 7 of the 10 biggest gainers in the month of March were non-tech companies.
I thought you were going to, is that a setup for me?
No, I never set you up.
Okay, yeah, no, you set me up all the time.
I set you up to trip, like
All
Lucy
right.
with the football.
I did want to get to a story. Thank you very much. All right, so I want to get to a story that is about psychedelic drugs, right? Investors have been pouring money for years, psychedelic drugs and companies that are involved in this space. Now, investors have been pouring money into them for kind of a few years, a while, hoping that it's going to kind of take off, and it hasn't really paid off. But if you check it out, once again, you're seeing investors piling in this year. Mind Medicine or MindMed shares have more than doubled this year. GH Research's stock surged by about 85%. And then you've got Tay Life Sciences. NV has climbed more than 25%. So we're seeing once again, and there's some regulatory movement that maybe supports it.
That's the thing. It's far from guaranteed that the FDA will approve some of these treatments that these companies offer, Scarlett. So investors once again betting on regulators actually making certain moves, and we see that how that's worked out for the pot stocks not so well over the last few years.
Yeah, it's kind of a lottery ticket, isn't it? I mean, anytime you were betting on a biotech or any kind of drug maker, or in this case, betting on FDA approval, unless you've got inside information.
All right,
And it's interesting you bring up the marijuana stocks, Tim, because wasn't part of the issue with those, why they underperform, was that there are a lot of people who use this stuff that they don't really necessarily want the legal version of it. You know, there's an added cost that comes with that because of the regulation. And, you know, if you've, I mean, I hate to say it, but if you already got a supplier, then, you know, why are you going to go to those biotechs that Carol was listing?
Because you know it doesn't have fentanyl in it, maybe?
It's different from psychedelics are a little
Raise a good point,
Alex.
Look, how many years have we heard that, you know, federal reclassification is just around the corner, right?
Yeah.
Or like a, you know.
Yeah.
Nationwide legalization.
Nationwide legalization. It'll come one day.
Yeah, we keep hearing that.
Yeah.
I don't need legalization. I just need to walk the street, you know?
Without getting hit in the face by the
say.
smell.
It's all free for everybody.
Get me started.
I apologize, Carol. I just need to unwind before the show.
Don't walk behind Romaine on the way home.
Yeah, don't go to his office, man. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Have a great holiday weekend. That's a wrap. Our cross-platform coverage on this Thursday. Radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We do it all right here on Beyond the Bell. We'll see you on Monday.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week, and it's Thursday, so you know what that means. It means a brand new episode of The Deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly dropping tonight. By my count, this is episode 5, and it features the pioneering broadcaster Hannah Storm. Carol, it airs this evening, starting at 9 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Originals. You can also catch it Friday at 7 p.m. on Bloomberg Television. The podcast, though, already available for download at Bloomberg.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
That's right. Bloomberg Originals chief correspondent Jason Kelly joining us from somewhere on the road. Where in the heck is Jason Kelly? He's always on the go.
Where are you?
Hello.
Well, I'm back in New York. It's raining. I'm on my way home from the airport, but I have to say I was somewhere much sunnier and much more awesome. Just to give you a little tease before we get into Hannah Storm, down in Miami, sat down with Alex Rodriguez and the GOAT, Serena Williams. So that's on an upcoming episode of The Deal. I have to tell you guys, it's awesome. You're going to just be blown away by this, as I hope you are by episode 5.
So let's talk about episode 5. Hannah Storm, well-known sports journalist. Just break it down for us. She's kind of legendary, right, when it comes to sports journalism.
total legend. And I think one of the things that you'll learn from this one that we really learned, Alex and I really learned, is she quite literally grew up in the game of basketball. Her dad was an executive in the NBA, actually in the ABA, one of the predecessor leagues that merged into the NBA. He was the first general manager of the Indiana Pacers. And so, you know, one of the things she has really seen up close and personal, literally from childhood on and through her career as a broadcaster, is the growth of the game. And I think we have a little bit to play for you.
I mean, to me, so I grew up not with an athlete. I grew up around all athletes around my house all the time, just giants. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I mean, they would be around the house. I would come see my dad or come for Thanksgiving or, you know, whatever it was, Christmas party. So I was always very comfortable around athletes. But I grew up on the business side.
Yeah.
Right. So I always understood how devastating losing can be on that level, the criticism that you take on that level. I guess in a way, it's given me a really global perspective on sports, which honestly, the average probably commentator doesn't really have.
So isn't that cool, guys, to think about the idea of growing up, like, on the business side? Like, you know, yes, around athletes, but also understanding, I mean, as Carol Master likes to say, we're Bloomberg after all. That's the part we love to hear about, right? I mean, it's understanding the dollars and cents here.
Well,
go ahead, Carol.
Because so much, like, listen, how much have you really dug very deeply into the business of sports, right? And money talks, money certainly, you know, guides where investors are putting, you know, investments into either specific sports or specific individuals. I mean, Jason, it's a big deal.
It's a huge deal. I mean, and we're talking, you know, on opening day of Major League Baseball, and it's hilarious. I don't know how much you've been on X today, and this might not hit your feed, Carol, even though you're a power user. Michael Arrighetti, who you guys know, CEO of Aries, is one of the new owners, along with our quasi-colleague David Rubenstein, of the Baltimore Orioles. And Mike Arrighetti stood up from his box, grabbed a mic, and told the assembled Orioles fans in Camden Yards, we're buying everybody a beer. That's a good owner.
That's pretty cool.
That, you know, it's crazy. I talked to David Rubenstein last night about it, and I'm like, you're going to be in the owner's box? And he said, well, maybe a little bit, but what I really want to do is walk the stands and kind of walk with the, you know, sit down and sit with the average fan. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole conversation about David Rubenstein, literally a son of Baltimore, you know, coming to now be the majority owner of the Orioles. So yeah, it's super fun, and the money that's colliding here is no joke, as you guys know.
Hey, speaking of money colliding, I want to go back to this episode 5 in Hannah Storm, because there's a really important person that she calls out in terms of who she saw rise alongside her own career, and that's none other than Michael Jordan. So talk a little bit about the impact that he had on her career and how she followed him.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of GOATs, I mean, that's you know, the great debate of basketball is like, who's the GOAT in basketball? Jordan certainly wins a lot of those bets with folks, or a lot of those accolades. I mean, what she saw was him change the game, I think, on the court and off. And obviously, you know, his winning ways with the Chicago Bulls, you know, elevated him in terms of the sport. But he also was one of those athletes, and there are only a handful who have done it. You know, you think about Ali, and you certainly think about Michael Jordan, and I dare say, going back to where we started, Serena, as folks who have transcended the sport into the broader culture. And Michael Jordan did that. If you've seen the movie Air, you know the business behind his decision-making, or the decision-making behind his business, I should say, on the part of him and his parents, especially his mom, to, you know, get a cut of all those Nike shoes. And so I think one of the things that Hannah really talks about is how that really elevated the game of basketball. And basketball, by the way, no shade to my partner and co-host Alex Rodriguez, basketball has really captured the broader imagination in a way that baseball used to. And the NBA is just like at the white hot center of everything we talk about, not just in sports, but also in culture.
Hey, I do wonder, I mean, Jason, we've talked about this too, kind of sometimes women in sports and how it can be more difficult. And I do wonder the advantage of her growing up around athletes, understanding and being comfortable around them, understanding the business side. Did it give her an advantage, or did she ever come across some tough times as well?
I think all of the above. I mean, I think she definitely was comfortable in a way that many weren't. And, you know, as you heard her say in that quote, like she had a little bit of an advantage. But let's not kid ourselves. You know, as a woman in broadcasting, it's a different world. And she has had, you know, certainly some moments in her career that she would rather not have had, you know, especially with athletes and in locker rooms. But, you know, she has certainly persevered and become, you know, as you described her at the top, a pioneering broadcaster. She went away from sports for a while and now is back and you know, just has some amazing perspective about sports from a very unique vantage point.
Jason, I know you've been traveling a lot. You've been working a lot. Have you had time to check out who's atop the brackets for a cause this year?
I have. I've been keeping a very close eye on it, mostly because they keep emailing me to make sure that like everything's right. So interestingly enough, our own Peter Grauer is number 2 on the men's side, so he's quite excited.
He's got to get Bill McDermott over at Service Now.
Exactly. So Bill McDermott is in first. Bill McDermott won the contest way back in 2016, so that would be a repeat if he holds on, which we've never had. Deborah Cafaro is in third, and then if you flip over to the women's side, Whitney Wolf-Hurd and Ken Griffin. I mean, have they ever been spoken in the same sentence? They're tied. They're tied for first on the women's side. So there's a lot of basketball left to play. That's one of the things I said to the contestants earlier this week. But it is very cool how it's all shaping out. Just some great names that, again, sort of cut across the sports world, the finance world, and, you know, sort of the broader culture. The founder of Bumble. It doesn't get much more cultural than that, right?
Gotta love it. Gotta love it. Jason Kelly, thank you so much. Speaking of cool, living a very cool life right now and who he's all talking to. Jason, have a great weekend.
Should have stayed in Florida for the weekend, Jason.
Yeah, what's up with that?
You know, it's raining here. It's going to be nice in New York.
It's supposed to get
tomorrow.
nicer. All right, Bloomberg Originals Chief Correspondent Jason Kelly. Catch this evening at 9 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Originals. Of course, the deal with Alex Rodriguez and Jason Kelly. It is dropping tonight. Also catch it Friday at 7 p.m. on Bloomberg TV. The podcast, by the way, already available for download at Bloomberg.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Carol Master, Tim Stenbeck. This is Bloomberg.